Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a bunch of new stories for you. Let's start right away with the first one. It is titled, "While I was buckling our 5-year-old into her car seat, my wife texted, moving to France with Jamie. I emptied our savings. Good luck paying rent." I looked at my daughter's paint-covered hands and simply replied, "Thanks for letting me know." When she landed in Paris and checked her account, it was raining hard that afternoon in Portland, the kind of downpour that sent rivulets of water racing across asphalt like tiny rivers breaking free. I sat in the driver's seat of my old sedan, wiper blades swiping back and forth in a steady rhythm, trying to ignore the chill that crept in through the thin insulation of the car door. Through the rain-speckled window, I watched toddlers clutching blankets and parents hurrying beneath umbrellas slip inside the small brick building of Little Leaves Daycare. My heart eased with the thought of seeing Sadie's bright smile, her tiny frame waddling toward me, ponytails bobbing. In that moment, everything felt normal, routine, safe. Then my phone buzzed on the passenger seat, shattering the quiet hum of the heater. I reached across, my hand trembling slightly as I unlocked the screen. I expected a text from Belle, probably asking if I'd be home in time for dinner or whether we needed more almond milk. Instead, the message that glowed back at me knocked the breath from my lungs. Moving to France with Jamie. I emptied our savings. Good luck paying rent. My fingers hovered over the screen, numb and uncertain. I blinked, reread the words, and felt the metallic taste of panic flood my mouth. Our savings, those painstakingly accumulated dollars, gone. And Jamie, her coworker, just a friend she'd introduced at awkward dinner parties. The engine ticked as it cooled. My mind raced through the last few months, replaying every conversation and stolen glance I had dismissed. Had I missed something? The late-night phone calls, the hushed tones, the way her eyes had flicked away whenever I mentioned our future. It didn't matter now. Belle had made her choice. And she'd taken everything with her. I opened the door, steering the umbrella through the storm as I hurried toward the entrance. Rain dripped from its canopy like tears, soaking the collar of my jacket. Inside, Sadie sat cross-legged on a tiny plastic chair. Finger paint smeared across her backpack in a riot of pink and purple. Her little tongue peeked between her lips in concentration as she stuck stickers onto a paper cutout of a dinosaur. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her face lighting up in an explosion of delight. "Daddy," she squealed, dropping her brush in a puddle of water on the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her enthusiasm still adorable, even as my chest tightened. I scooped her into my arms, lifting her to my shoulder so she could wrap her arms around my neck. Her laughter rang out, a bell-like sound that should have been comforting. Instead, it twisted me with guilt. How could I tell her that Mommy was gone, that everything we'd worked for had vanished overnight? I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo, and forced a smile that I hoped looked reassuring. "Hey, kiddo," I said, smoothing the wet strands of hair that clung to her forehead. She babbled on about a game she played with Miss Karen, a funny hat, running in the rain. My eyes darted to her little fingers, now sticky with paint, and then back to my phone as it vibrated in my pocket again. I set Sadie in her car seat and climbed back into the driver's side, the message replaying in my mind like a broken record. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as I drove the half-block to our 2-bedroom apartment, the wipers beating out a frantic rhythm. Inside, the walls seemed to press in on me, the dim hallway light flickering as if uncertain. Sadie bounded ahead, chattering about painting rainbows at school, oblivious to the storm raging in my chest. I slipped off my wet coat, draped it over a chair, and guided her to the kitchen table, where she immediately grabbed coloring pencils and set to work. I pulled my laptop onto the table and logged in. The login screen slid away to reveal our joint savings account, now an empty spreadsheet with only one glaring figure, $0. My heart thundered as I clicked through to checking. There it was, $319. $120,000 had been drained overnight, leaving us with pennies and despair. I stared at the numbers as though they'd rearranged themselves into something more hopeful. They didn't. The reality settled around me like a wet blanket. No groceries, no rent, no clue how to keep a roof over our heads. Sadie looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, will you help me color this unicorn?" she asked, lifting a page covered in rainbow arches. Her innocence stabbed at me. I forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart." I sank into the chair next to her, watching as she carefully traced the outline, but my mind was elsewhere, ticking through options. Borrow from my parents? No, they were retired and barely making ends meet themselves. A payday loan? That would sink us deeper into debt. Freelance gigs? They paid too little, too slow. "What's wrong, Daddy?" Sadie's voice wavered, her big green eyes searching mine. My throat tightened. How could I tell her the truth? Instead, I knelt and put on my most encouraging tone. "Nothing, kiddo. Daddy's just thinking about how to make our apartment even nicer." She nodded, her faith in me shining like a beacon. I gulped and kissed her cheek, feeling a swell of both pride and dread. I opened my phone and typed a response to Belle's message, the words stark against my racing pulse. "Thanks for letting me know." I hit send before I could second guess myself. The simplicity of it, no anger, no pleading, felt like the only defense I had left. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned back to Sadie, determined to shield her from this blow, at least for today. In the echo of the rain against the window, I made a silent promise: I would find a way to survive this. Not just for me, but for her. Because in that storm, she was the only light I had left. Back at the apartment, I sat at the kitchen table with a knot in my chest and a screen full of zeros staring back at me. Outside, the rain from earlier had calmed to a whisper. But the storm inside me had only intensified. Sadie was at the corner of the table, legs swinging beneath her chair, tongue peeking out in concentration as she colored a lopsided tree with purple leaves. Every so often, she'd hold it up and ask, "Do you like this color, Daddy?" And I'd nod each time, smiling like my world hadn't just caved in. I turned back to the laptop and refreshed the bank screen as if that would somehow change the outcome. Still $31,941 in checking. Savings, zero, gone just like that. Years of saving, every bonus, every sacrifice. I could see Belle's handwriting in my head, neatly labeling the folders we kept: vacation, home fund, emergency. She used to say, "We're not rich, but we're smart." And now she'd taken all of it to fund a new life with Jamie. I scrolled through the transactions, jaw tightening with every line. First the wire transfer, $118,200, sent to a bank in Marseille, France. Then 2 hotel charges, a business class ticket to Charles de Gaulle, and a car rental in her name. She wasn't running. She was relocating, rebuilding, without me, without Sadie. I picked up my phone and called the bank, fingers cold and stiff. The woman on the line was polite and efficient, but ultimately helpless. "Because it was a joint account, sir, both parties had equal access. We cannot reverse the transaction without her authorization." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she understood what it felt like to be gutted by someone you trusted, to be left holding your daughter's hand with nothing but $319 and an empty fridge. After I hung up, I sat there for a long moment, staring at the beige walls of our apartment. The same walls I had once painted with Belle, her laughter echoing as she flicked a paintbrush at me in defiance of my no-mess rule. It didn't feel like a home anymore. Just a box filled with shadows and lies. Sadie slid her drawing across the table. "Look, it's a rainbow tree. I made it for you." I swallowed hard and reached for her, pulling her into my lap and hugging her tightly. She giggled, wrapping her little arms around my neck. "You're squeezing too hard," she squealed. I loosened my grip but didn't let go. "Sorry, sweetheart," I whispered. "Daddy's just really proud of you." She kissed my cheek and wriggled back to her coloring. I watched her for a moment longer, then stood up and went to the pantry. 2 cans of soup, a box of pasta, no milk, no eggs, no meat. I did the math in my head. Groceries, rent, power bill. That $319 might stretch a few days if I skipped meals and found a way to keep Sadie's routine intact. I pulled out my phone again and tapped open the Notes app. "Emergency plan," I typed. I started listing what I could sell: the TV, my old laptop, the stand mixer Belle swore we needed but used twice. I had kept up some freelance design gigs over the years. Maybe one of my clients could fast-track a project. I could reach out tonight. I had no pride left to lose. As I typed, I couldn't stop thinking about how this had all started. Belle and I met at a marketing workshop in Seattle 6 years ago. I was there because my job required it. She was there because she wanted to run the room, and she did, charming, confident, magnetic. She wore ambition like perfume and left people leaning in, wanting more. I fell for her fast. When Sadie came along, everything changed. I had a solid job offer from a creative agency, but daycare costs were astronomical and Belle was on the rise at Horizon Com. So I turned the offer down, stayed home, took on part-time freelance work and diaper duty. I told myself we were a team, that sacrifices didn't need to be counted. But looking back now, I saw the shift. As her career climbed, her patience thinned. My work wasn't real anymore. She'd roll her eyes when I showed her logos I'd designed or clients I'd landed. "That's cute," she'd say while texting Jamie about pitch decks and lunch meetings. She began spending more time at the office and I convinced myself it was just work, that I was imagining the way she checked out during family dinners, how she turned toward the wall when we went to bed. I ignored the warning signs, the deleted texts, the missed calls from Jamie, the sudden need for space. She said I was too sensitive, that I was reading into things, that she needed to grow. I thought if I just gave her room, she'd come back to me. I thought love meant staying even when it got hard. Now, standing in the kitchen with an aching stomach and an angry heart, I realized she hadn't just left. She'd erased me from her life entirely. And in the process, she'd robbed our daughter of stability, of security. Sadie looked up again. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner?" she asked. Her voice was hopeful, unaware that our fridge was nearly empty. I smiled even though it hurt. "Sure, honey," I said. "We'll make the best spaghetti ever." She clapped her hands and bounced in her seat. And I stepped into the kitchen, hiding the panic I felt. I boiled the last of the pasta. No sauce, but I mixed in a little butter and salt and called it magic noodles. She ate every bite. After putting her to bed, I sat in the dark living room, only the hallway light spilling in. I stared at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. No backup plan, no fallback savings. But I still had one thing Belle hadn't counted on: fight. Not desperation, not anger, but resolve. I opened my laptop and started emailing every client I'd ever had, offering overnight turnarounds, discounts, whatever it took. Then I pulled up my calendar and started blocking hours. Early mornings before Sadie woke, late nights after she slept, I would build something from the rubble Belle had left behind. Because she may have taken the money, but she hadn't taken Sadie, and I would make damn sure she never could. The next morning dawned pale and hesitant, as though even the sky felt reluctant to meet the day. I shuffled into the kitchen, still in my rumpled jacket from yesterday's storm, and flicked on the coffee maker. Steam curled from the pot, filling the apartment with a familiar comfort, but it did little to quell the tightness knotting my gut. I glanced at the clock, 6:45 a.m. soon. I'd need to wake Sadie for daycare, field client emails, and begin the uphill climb of rebuilding our lives from the pit where Belle had left us. My phone buzzed against the countertop, dragging me from my spiraling thoughts. I picked it up, bracing myself for another text from Belle or some notification about more drained funds. Instead, the caller ID flashed. Mom, Belle's. Of all the voices I never wanted to hear, hers was at the top of the list. I tapped accept, my heart thundering in my ears. "Hello," I said, pressing the phone to my ear as I poured coffee into a chipped mug. "Good morning, Michael," came Margaret's voice, cool and clipped like a porcelain teacup tapping against a saucer. Her tone carried no warmth, only accusation, a loaded inhale that suggested she already had her script memorized. "I've been getting calls from your lawyer." My hand froze mid-pour. "My lawyer?" I echoed, slow and deliberate. "Yes," she replied sharply. "She told me you filed for emergency custody and asset freezing." A brief pause. "And that you're claiming I blackmailed Belle into giving up visitation unless she sent more money." The world tilted. I stared at the coffee dripping from the machine, a sick realization winding like a snake in my chest. "Margaret," I said carefully. "Where are you getting this?" "I have Belle's texts," she said, her voice steady. "She showed me yours, threatening texts, accusing her of abandoning Sadie if she didn't comply." There was a tinge of satisfaction in her words, as though she delighted in painting me the villain. "I'm worried about my granddaughter." My vision blurred. Not only had Belle fled across an ocean, emptied our account, and left me scrambling for rent, but she'd turned the narrative against me, and now her mother was complicit. The fire that had been smoldering inside me snapped to life. I gripped the edge of the counter, nails digging into the laminate. "Margaret, you need to stop listening to lies," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "Belle is the one who emptied our savings. She's the one who fled to France. I have her texts in her own words." "Don't gaslight me, Michael," she shot back. "Belle said you threatened her. Told her she'd never see Sadie again unless she funded your apartment. And now she's scared. She's defending herself." My stomach revolted. "She's defending herself by stealing our daughter's future," I said, voice low and trembling with rage. "I never threatened her. I asked her to talk to me about money before she wiped us out." "Talk?" "She tried," Margaret scoffed. "You wouldn't listen. You're unstable. I've seen your social media, angry rants about her job, her coworker. You've become obsessed." Her words were ice shards sinking into my skin. "I'm going to see Sadie today, and I'll evaluate how safe it is for her to be around you." Time seemed to slow. The coffee machine ticked, then hissed. I raised a hand to steady my shaking jaw. Sadie, my 5-year-old, could be withheld from me based on Belle's lies. Margaret would show up at daycare, unleash her version of events, and I might walk away without my daughter in the back seat. "Margaret, please," I said, swallowing hard. "You know me. You know I'd never hurt my daughter. I know what she told me, Margaret replied coldly. I'll see you this afternoon, Michael. Make sure you have your story straight. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the screen, heart thumping like a war drum. The coffee machine clicked off and the mug sat half full on the counter. I wrapped my fingers around it, feeling its warmth seep into my bones. Then, as though jolted awake, I remembered Sadie waiting for breakfast. In the living room, she sat on the floor with a puzzle, humming happily. Her hair was a tangle of curls, and she looked up when I entered, her face blossoming into that trusting smile I treasured. Hi, Daddy, she said, scooting over to hug my leg. I knelt beside her, picking up puzzle pieces with deliberate calm. Hey, pumpkin. Hungry? She nodded, and I carried her to the table. As I made scrambled eggs and toast, I forced my mind to sort out the chaos. I'd expected Belle's betrayal, but her mother's attack was another blow, a reminder that the fight wouldn't be only against my ex-wife, but against an entire family willing to lie to save face. Over breakfast, Sadie chattered about her dreams, talking whales and flying squirrels. I smiled and nodded, each bite of toast tasting like a burden. Every laugh she shared was a promise I couldn't break. My world had shrunk to the size of her hand wrapped in mine, and I refused to let anyone sever that bond. After dropping her off at daycare, I sat in the car for a long moment, hands clenched on the wheel. The sun tried to break through ragged clouds, but the morning still felt dull and heavy. I dialed Nadia's number with determined fingers. When she picked up, I spoke quickly. Nadia, it's me. Margaret called. She's accusing me of blackmailing Belle, threatening to refuse visitation unless she sent money. There was a pause. Then, in her measured voice, we'll need to address that immediately. Get me copies of any messages Belle sent you and hers to Margaret. We'll request a hearing to refute the allegations before they can impact custody. I exhaled, relief mingling with the tension in my shoulders. Nadia always cut through the noise, turned chaos into strategy. Thank you, I said. I'll upload everything tonight. As I turned the key in the ignition, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the empty car seat behind me, Sadie's seat. My resolve hardened. They could accuse me of any number of things, but they would never separate me from my daughter. Not if I did everything in my power to protect her. And so, with a breath of resolve, I drove away from the daycare, a father with a fierce purpose and a storm far greater than the morning's rain brewing around him. After waving goodbye to Sadie at the daycare entrance, I sat in the car for a moment. My reflection ghosted across the rain-speckled windshield. The morning air was crisp, almost electric, as though warning me that each step I took today would carry the weight of everything that had come before. I slipped the key into the ignition and drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, staring at the appointment card in my hand. Belle's old office. 9 a.m. I inhaled, smoothed my shirt, and drove through the sleepy Portland streets toward Horizon Calm, where Belle had vanished without so much as a notice. The building loomed ahead, its glass facade tinted gray under the overcast sky. I parked in the visitor lot, heart pounding in my ears, louder than the engine clicking off. The lobby was sleek and modern, marble floors polished to a mirror sheen, potted ferns arched like green canopies, and muted digital displays cycling through corporate announcements. I felt like an intruder in someone else's world. When I reached the reception desk, a young woman glanced up from her computer, brows arching in polite inquiry. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice the perfect blend of professional warmth and practiced indifference. I cleared my throat, swallowing the lump of dread that had climbed into it. "I'm looking for Belle Nolan. She worked here in marketing. I have some personal items to pick up." Her expression flickered, part surprise, part sympathy, before she masked it with protocol. "I'm sorry, sir. Belle resigned 2 weeks ago. She didn't leave any forwarding address. She tapped a few keys. It was effective the day of her resignation. We sent a confirmation letter to her home address on file, but beyond that, there isn't much more I can do." Resigned. That word tasted like betrayal in my mouth. 2 weeks ago. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, feeling the air rush out of me. She shook her head. She gave 3 business days notice as our policy requires, and left. No explanation. She offered a practiced apology. "I'm sorry for what you're going through." I managed a curt nod, unable to summon genuine gratitude. "Thank you." I turned away, the receptionist's gaze following me with a hint of pity. As I walked back through the lobby, I felt exposed, like I'd just lost the last thread connecting me to Belle's previous life. She'd meticulously erased her professional identity as well as our shared finances. The ride home was a blur of red lights and gray buildings, but my thoughts circled a single point: planning. This departure had been planned. Spontaneity didn't comport with secrecy and timing. Belle's quiet slip from the company mirrored the way she had slipped out of our life, leaving only echoes. When I reached the apartment, the front door gave a hollow creak as I stepped inside. Sadie's artwork, handprints and bright orange crayon sketches of stick families, lined the hallway. I paused, tracing a painted palm with my thumb, remembering how small she'd been when she first pressed her handprint onto the wall. I forced myself to breathe. This place had to feel like home for her. I couldn't let its walls carry the cold weight of Belle's betrayal. I headed to what had once been her home office, a corner of the living room partitioned by a tall bookcase filled with marketing textbooks and knickknacks from conferences. I opened the first drawer of the small desk where she used to settle after work, a few pens, a dog-eared notebook full of campaign ideas, and then a stack of file folders stamped with the Horizon Com logo. I rifled through them, half hoping to find a clue, a name, an address, anything that might explain why she'd left so abruptly. A single envelope lay at the bottom, yellowed at the edges, addressed to Belle in neat cursive. I picked it up, running my thumb across its surface. The postmark read May 12, 3 months ago, sent from an address in Marseille, France. My pulse quickened. I slit the flap and unfolded the card inside. On the front was a watercolor of a sailboat cutting through azure waves. Inside, Margaret's looping script, Bon voyage, ma chérie. Thank you for letting me help with the apartment deposit. Love, Mom. Beneath that, a smaller note, I'm proud of you. Enjoy your new life. I sank onto the edge of the desk, the envelope falling from my numb fingers onto the carpet. My mind spun. Margaret, her mother, had funded the apartment in Marseille 3 months ago, long before Belle's final wire transfer. The money had been funneled discreetly, no suspicious activity flagged by our bank until it was too late. This wasn't a sudden breakup. It was a family conspiracy. Betrayal hadn't begun when Belle emptied our account. It had begun when Margaret cleared her own savings to set her daughter up for an escape. I thought of every phone call, every text message I'd brushed off as work stress or minor tension. I thought of Margaret's sudden interest in my parenting skills, her unsolicited advice on childcare, her quiet presence at birthday parties, as if she were ingratiating herself for some unknown purpose. I'd welcomed her help, believing her to be a concerned mother-in-law rather than an accomplice. My chest tightened with shame and anger. Sadie's laughter drifted from the next room, where she was playing with her stuffed giraffe. I wiped my face, clutching the envelope like evidence of a crime. I laid it on the desk and exhaled, voice trembling. You planned this, I whispered to no one. You all planned this. I stood and walked to the living room, glancing at the coffee table strewn with children's books and mismatched socks, breadcrumbs leading me back to reality. I scooped up Sadie and hugged her close, inhaling the faint scent of strawberry shampoo. She giggled and kissed my cheek, and I held her tighter. This wasn't a story about abandonment. It was a story about protection. I would fight for her, even if it meant taking on 2 generations of a family determined to rewrite the narrative. That night, I laid the envelope and card on the kitchen counter. I lit a lamp, its warm glow illuminating the handwritten note. The words happy travels seemed to mock me. But instead of breaking me, they galvanized a new resolve. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a setup. And now that I'd uncovered their paper trail, the next step was to expose it. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Nadia, scanning the envelope and card with the camera on my phone. My fingers flew over the keys as I explained what I'd found, detailing every transaction and every secret payment. With each sentence, my anger sharpened into clarity. Tomorrow, I would take this to court. I would file motions to recover the illicitly transferred funds and prove that Belle and Margaret had colluded to steal our future. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the turning point. And as I tucked Sadie into bed later, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, I whispered, "We're going to be okay, kiddo." In the hush of the apartment, as the night settled around us, I felt a fierce hope take root, a hope that shone brighter than the betrayal, stronger than the lies. I would protect her with every ounce of my being, and I would not let them rewrite our history. The morning I walked into Nadia Kim's downtown office, the sky was clear for the first time in days, as if the heavens had paused to watch what I was about to do. I parked in the metered lot and stood for a moment, staring up at the sleek glass facade of the building. My reflection wavered in the tinted windows, faces of worry, exhaustion, and determination all tangled together. I straightened my tie, patting my suit jacket to smooth imaginary creases, then stepped inside. The lobby's marble floors gleamed beneath my shoes, and a receptionist looked up with polite curiosity as I approached. I gave my name, Michael Carter, appointment with Nadia Kim, and she nodded, picking up the phone in one graceful motion. "She'll see you now, Mr. Carter," she said, voice calm and reassuring, as though she understood the gravity of my situation. I thanked her and followed her down a short hallway into Nadia's office. Nadia sat behind a dark wood desk, her kind eyes framed by a pair of understated glasses. She rose to greet me, offering a firm handshake that conveyed both warmth and confidence. Her presence felt like an anchor, cutting through the storm of my thoughts. Behind her, shelves lined with legal tomes and framed degrees hinted at the depth of her experience. A large window to her right offered a view of the city's rooftops where sunlight glinted off distant buildings. "Michael," she said. "Good to see you. Please have a seat." I settled into the chair opposite her desk, smoothing my palms on my lap. Nadia's assistant slid a thin leather folder across the desk. "I've organized everything you sent over, Belle's texts, Margaret's envelope photocopies, the bank statements, Alex's audio transcript. We're ready to build our strategy." I exhaled, relief mingling with the tension in my chest. "Thank you," I said, voice husky. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Nadia offered a sympathetic nod. "Let's talk through the timeline first to make sure we haven't missed any details." She opened the folder, revealing color-coded tabs. "We'll start with the initial wire transfer from your joint account to Marseille. Then we'll move to the discovery of the envelope from Margaret, and finally Alex's recording that confirms Jamie's involvement." As she spoke, I watched her hands move deliberately, opening the folder, lifting documents, adjusting her glasses. Every gesture exuded competency. I felt the knot in my stomach loosen, replaced by purposeful clarity. "By freezing those assets," Nadia continued, "we ensure Belle can't dissipate funds before we get a judge's order. We'll file for temporary support payments to cover rent and basic living expenses until she's compelled to comply." She paused, searching my face. "And we'll push for supervised visitation or suspended rights if she continues to pull these stunts." My heart pounded. "Do you really think we can stop her?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Nadia leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Michael, the law is on your side here. She's diverted marital assets, abandoned her parental responsibilities, and now she's enlisting her mother to spread lies. That's not just unethical, it's actionable. We have a solid case." I nodded, drawing strength from her conviction. "Okay, what's next?" She clicked her pen and tapped it against her notepad. "I'll draft the emergency motion today. We'll request a hearing within 72 hours, citing the urgency of rent, utilities, and child support. We'll submit affidavits from you, Alex, and our bank's fraud department confirming the illegitimate transfers. I'll also file a motion to compel Marie Nolan, Margaret, to produce any communication she had with Belle regarding financial assistance. We need to show collusion." The word collusion landed like a hammer blow. Margaret had wanted to help her daughter. Now she'd unwittingly become an accomplice to theft. I felt a mixture of anger and resolve bubbling within me. "Anything I need to do?" I asked, steeling myself for the work ahead. "Gather any additional documentation you might have, emails, voicemails, anything that corroborates your timeline. I'll need your detailed affidavit as well. Describe how you discovered the transfers, what you and Belle discussed about finances before she left, and any misrepresentations she made." She slid a printed affidavit form toward me. "Fill this out by the end of the day and we'll file tomorrow morning." I accepted the form, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was more than paragraphs on paper. It was my path to protecting Sadie's future. Nadia stood, signaling the session was over. "I'll call you tonight with updates. In the meantime, try to rest. I know this is overwhelming, but remember, you're doing the right thing for your daughter." I rose and extended my hand. "Thank you, Nadia." "Really?" She smiled, a hint of compassion softening her professional demeanor. "We'll get through this." On the drive home, I let the city blur past, focusing instead on the next steps, drafting my affidavit, lining up emergency funds, preparing for court. But beneath my anxiety ran a current of hope. With Nadia's guidance, I felt we could turn the tide. When I pulled into the apartment parking spot, the late afternoon sun filtered through clouds, casting a soft glow. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat and headed inside. Sadie's laughter drifted from her bedroom. She was watching her favorite cartoon. My chest tightened with affection. I slipped into her room and found her curled beneath a blanket, eyes bright. "Daddy," she exclaimed, scrambling out with a plush giraffe hugged to her chest. "Guess what? I drew a rainbow tree for you again." I sank to the floor, taking the drawing she held out proudly. It was similar to the first, but more elaborate, roots winding into a heart, clouds raining glitter. "It's perfect," I said, hugging her. "Thank you." She yawned, and I scooped her into my arms. Carrying her to the kitchen table, I spread the affidavit form among her crayons, watching her small hand reach for the red pencil. My heart swelled with love and purpose. As she scribbled hearts around the edges of the form, I realized this was more than a legal battle. It was a testament to resilience. Belle and her family might have orchestrated the collapse of our savings, but they couldn't dismantle my commitment to Sadie. Together, Nadia and I would build a fortress of truth around her. That night, after tucking Sadie into bed and kissing her forehead, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write. Each sentence I penned was a brick in the wall I'd raise against betrayal. Outside, the city lights twinkled, but inside the glow of my laptop illuminated more than text. It illuminated hope. I would fight this war chapter by chapter, affidavit by affidavit, until my daughter's future was reclaimed. For her, I would not falter. I would not yield. A few days later, just as the autumn sun was beginning its lazy descent, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I glanced up from the kitchen counter where I was packing sandwiches for Sadie's after-school snack. It was 3:17 p.m., barely enough time to get her from daycare and still make it to my meeting with Alex. I swiped to answer, steeling myself. "Hello," I said, shouldering my bag. "Michael Carter?" The voice was tentative, hushed, a woman trying not to be overheard in a crowded cafe, I guessed. "That's me." My heart skipped a beat. I'd never met anyone besides Nadia who knew my last name. And this felt serious. "I'm Alex Tremblay," she continued. "I used to work on Belle's team at Horizon Com. She asked me not to reach out, but I think you deserve to know the truth." I exhaled, pressing my back against the fridge. "Truth about what?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Alex hesitated. "Meet me at Rose's Cafe on Stark Street in 30 minutes. I don't have much time and I don't want to talk on the phone." I grabbed my keys. "Okay, I'll be there." I glanced at Sadie's silhouette through the doorway. She was stacking toy blocks in her room, humming under her breath. I took one last look at her and whispered, "I'll be back soon, kiddo." Rose's Cafe was a modest spot with ivy-clad windows and the rich aroma of espresso drifting into the street. I slipped inside, the chatter of late-day patrons and clinking cups greeting me. In the far corner by a fogged window, I spotted Alex, mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a neat bun, eyes darting around like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. She rose when I approached, offering a trembling smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, lowering her voice as I sat down. I nodded, leaning in. "I'm sorry it's like this," she glanced over her shoulder. "I didn't want to believe Belle was capable of what she's done, but I can't stay silent anymore." I took a breath. "What have you learned?" Alex pulled a manila envelope from her bag and slipped it across the table. My fingers closed around it. "Jamie Holloway isn't just a friend. He's the key to her financial escape." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She opened the envelope and extracted a stack of printed bank records, offshore account statements, and a USB stick. "These are records I obtained from our finance department under the pretext of an audit." Belle had access to certain accounts under her work credentials. She used that access to move company funds through intermediate shell companies, then funneled part of it into an account in Jamie's name in the Cayman Islands. From there, it went to her personal account in Marseille. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole cafe would hear it. She stole from her company? Alex's eyes gleamed with shame and relief all at once. Not just the company. She emptied our joint personal savings too. But she mixed the transfers so that if anyone traced the money, it would look like a legitimate company wire for a marketing project. She paused, voice dropping. "I found an audio clip too." She slid the USB stick across the table. "Play it yourself if you want proof." I pocketed the stick and exhaled, staring at Alex. The betrayal stung anew. Not only was Belle turning her back on her family and me, she had leveraged her position of trust at work to steal from her employer and involve Jamie in the crime. Alex nodded, tears brimming. "I never meant for this to get so big, but when she laughed about it, when she joked that you'd crumble and that you could keep the blender, I knew you had to see it." I clenched my jaw, imagining Belle's voice mocking me, reducing my fears to punchlines. "You're brave to speak out," I said softly. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her confession hanging between us like a storm cloud. Then Alex reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. "I'm sorry, Michael. For everything." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "Let's get through this." That evening, after I tucked Sadie into bed and kissed her soft cheek, I retreated to the living room. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I plugged the USB stick into my laptop and clicked on the audio file. The recording crackled with ambient noise, clinking glasses, distant chatter, before Belle's voice came through, clear and unrepentant. "Honestly, Jamie, he's a mess," she laughed, the note of amusement sharp enough to cut glass. "I told him it's just money. He'll sulk for a day, but he'll get over it. He doesn't know how big this transfer is. I said he could have the blender." Thought it would make a good joke. Jamie's voice followed, chuckling. He'll keep the apartment. Poor guy. But hey, we've got a seawall now, right? My stomach dropped. A seawall, code for the money she'd funneled. She wasn't remorseful. She was amused. I closed my eyes, recalling the text that had started it all, moving to France with Jamie. I emptied our savings. The words had felt final, devastating. But now I had proof of premeditation, collusion, and mockery. This evidence would pierce the veneer of her lies and expose the full breadth of her betrayal. The next morning, I bundled Sadie into her car seat and drove to Nadia's office, the envelope of company records and the USB stick in my briefcase. My hands gripped the wheel as I rehearsed the facts: offshore shell accounts, diverted corporate funds, recorded admissions. This wasn't just theft. It was conspiracy, fraud, betrayal across every front. When I reached Nadia, she ushered me into her office, her expression sober. I laid out the documents and handed over the USB stick. She plugged it in, listened to the clip, her brow furrowing in determination. "This changes everything," she said, pulling out fresh forms. "We'll amend our motions to include corporate fraud and identity theft. Jamie Holloway can be subpoenaed, as can Horizon Comm's financial records. The judge will see this as a comprehensive scheme, not just a marital dispute." Relief washed through me, mingled with righteous anger. Belle hadn't just run. She'd orchestrated a financial coup, enlisted her mother and coworker, and tried to frame me as unstable. Now, with Alex's courage and Nadia's expertise, we would dismantle that scheme. Back at the apartment, I tucked Sadie into bed and watched her drift to sleep. In her peaceful face, I found the steel I needed. I picked up my phone and sent Belle a brief message: "I have proof. We start motions tomorrow." I hit send, feeling the weight of finality and the promise of justice. As I closed the apartment door behind me, I sensed a shift in the air. The war had escalated, but I was no longer defenseless. With evidence in hand and allies by my side, I would not rest until every last account was restored, every lie exposed, and my daughter's future secured. The fight wasn't over. It was just getting started. The courthouse loomed like a monument to cold justice, its gray walls rising against a leaden sky as if daring anyone to challenge its authority. I parked in the visitor lot and took a steadying breath before stepping onto the marble steps. In my briefcase, I carried the weight of our entire case: bank statements, the envelope from Margaret, offshore records from Alex, the damning audio clip, and my own affidavit. Beside those papers lay Nadia's motions for emergency custody, support, and asset freezes. Today, all of it would go before a judge, and I prayed our evidence would cut through Belle's web of lies. Inside, the hallway smelled of polished wood and old carpeting. I passed rows of closed doors, each a doorway into someone's fate. My heart pounded, but I kept my head high. At room 312, I paused, smoothing my tie and tapping the briefcase handle. Nadia met me there with a reassuring nod. Her confidence was the keel, keeping me from capsizing. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. I swallowed and let out a slow breath. More than ever. The courtroom was hushed except for the rustle of papers and the soft shuffle of feet. On the bench, Judge Lambert reviewed files under her bifocals, her expression neutral but keen. Beside her sat Belle's attorney, a sharply dressed man with a clipped accent and a notebook full of post-it tabs. Belle herself stood behind him, immaculately dressed in navy blue, hair pulled back, eyes cool and distant. At her side was her mother, Margaret, clasping purse straps so tightly her knuckles were white. Nadia whispered, "I'll present first." With a gentle squeeze of my hand, she rose and approached the bench. I watched her every step, every gesture. She unfolded her notes and began, "Your Honor, I represent Michael Carter, father of Sadie Carter, aged 5. We petition this court for emergency relief based on evidence of diversion of marital assets, parental abandonment, and ongoing efforts to mischaracterize Mr. Carter's actions. We seek temporary custody, a freeze on all accounts associated with Ms. Nolan and her family, and immediate child support from the defendant." She spoke slowly, laying out the timeline. She described the initial transfer to Marseille, the envelope from Margaret dated 3 months prior, and the offshore shell accounts revealed by Alex. She cited the audio clip in which Ms. Nolan laughed about emptying savings and mocking me. Finally, she handed over my affidavit, in which I described discovering the transfers, Belle's refusal to discuss finances, and the devastating impact on our family. Judge Lambert leaned forward, brows raised. "Miss Kim, is there evidence that this recording was obtained lawfully?" Nadia placed the USB stick on the bench. "Yes, Your Honor. Miss Tremblay provided it under whistleblower provisions. We have a chain of custody log, an affidavit from Ms. Tremblay, and our bank's fraud investigator confirming the authenticity of the transactions and recording. The judge nodded slowly, reviewing the stick and folder. Next, she motioned toward Belle's attorney. He rose, clearing his throat. His voice slid out smooth and practiced. Your Honor, while Ms. Kim paints a dramatic picture, much of her evidence is circumstantial. The transfers, though unfortunate, were authorized by both parties at the time. As for the recording, its origins are unclear. My client resigned of her own volition, seeking a fresh start. Mr. Carter's reaction, filing motion after motion, indicates instability and a vindictive attitude toward Ms. Nolan's pursuit of independence. He gestured to Belle, who sat stiffly. I didn't steal anything, she said. I used our savings to pay debts we had accrued. Michael knew about it. He just chose not to act. I wanted a new life, unburdened by his micromanaging. Her words were clipped, rehearsed. I felt my chest tighten as she painted herself the victim and me the villain. Margaret's lawyer followed with a brief statement accusing me of threatening texts and fabricating allegations. Margaret herself fixed me with a cold stare, lips pressed tight as though daring me to challenge her. My stomach churned, but through the noise I saw Nadia's steady gaze. She rose again for her rebuttal, unfolding Alex's corporate records and the bank's fraud report. She highlighted the code used to disguise the transfers as company expenses, and she introduced the subpoena we'd filed to Horizon Com's finance department, requesting emails showing Belle's repeated unauthorized withdrawal requests. Then Nadia turned to the recording. She pressed play on her tablet and the courtroom filled with Belle's voice echoing off the walls. I watched as Belle's face paled and Margaret's jaw slackened. The judge closed her eyes for a moment, as though absorbing the full impact of hearing a mother laugh at abandoning her own child. When the audio ended, Nadia closed her folder and fixed the judge with calm intensity. Your Honor, what this recording demonstrates is clear intent and malice. My client has been maligned, his daughter endangered, and his trust betrayed. We ask for the relief necessary to protect this child and preserve the integrity of marital assets until a full hearing. The courtroom was silent. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Judge Lambert set down her pen and looked from me to Belle. Based on the evidence before me, wire transfers without mutual consent, involvement of offshore accounts, the recorded admissions, I find probable cause to believe Ms. Nolan engaged in financial misconduct and parental abandonment. I grant Mr. Carter's motion for sole temporary custody of Sadie, effective immediately, and I order a freeze on all assets tied to Ms. Nolan, Jamie Holloway, and Margaret Nolan, pending further hearing. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Belle's attorney sputtered. Your Honor, may we request supervised visitation? Judge Lambert opened her notes. Ms. Nolan shall have supervised visitation at Mr. Carter's discretion, to be arranged through family services. Any unsupervised contact is hereby prohibited. Further, Ms. Nolan and Ms. Nolan Sr. are to produce all financial records related to the transfers by next week, or face contempt. She tapped her gavel softly. Court is adjourned. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then the gavel's crack echoed like thunder. I exhaled, my shoulders sagging as the gravity of the victory settled over me. Nadia slipped beside me, handing me the signed order. I pressed it to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. In the hallway, reporters and a handful of onlookers buzzed, but all I wanted was to leave this place with Sadie. Outside, the air had cleared, gray clouds parting to reveal pale sunlight. I took Nadia's arm, and we walked down the steps together. The judge's ruling had bought us time and security. I slid into my car, briefcase on the passenger seat, and started the engine. My phone buzzed, a text from Alex. You did it. I responded with a single word, thanks. Driving toward daycare, I felt exhaustion wash through me. But beneath it, the first true glimmer of relief. The legal thunder in that gray courthouse had broken the storm of betrayal. Now, with our assets frozen and custody secured, I could begin rebuilding our lives, one steady step at a time. And above all, I would remind Sadie every day that her daddy would move mountains to protect her. The following morning, an eerie calm settled over our small apartment as though the whirlwind of court had passed, leaving only the hush of tentative relief. I brewed coffee and poured it into my favorite chipped mug, its handle a familiar anchor amid the storm of recent weeks. In the quiet kitchen, I paged through emails on my laptop, notifications of asset freezes, requests from Nadia for further documentation, and one unfamiliar subject line, Horizon Com inquiry, urgent. My pulse quickened. Had word of our case reached her former colleagues? I clicked open the message, revealing a terse note from Horizon Com's legal department requesting details about the alleged misuse of corporate resources. I hesitated. This inquiry was a double-edged sword. It could further substantiate our claims, or it could escalate the drama beyond my control. At 7:45 a.m., I packed Sadie's lunch and woke her for breakfast, tucking a small drawing she'd made, rainbow suns and flying unicorns, into her bag. She bounded down the stairs, hair in sleepy tangles, and climbed onto her stool. I spooned oatmeal into her bowl, cinnamon swirling in the steam, and she ate with glassy eyes and murmured, "Thanks," before bounding out the door to catch the daycare van. Even though I was secure in custody, each goodbye still felt like a negotiation with an uncertain world. I kissed her temples, inhaled her strawberry shampoo scent, and whispered, "I'll see you tonight, kiddo." Once the van rumbled away, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the Horizon Com email. It asked for copies of any communications between Ms. Nolan and company finance, including emails, audits, or unusual transfer requests. I forwarded the message to Nadia with a brief note, "Looks like they want the full story." She replied, "Perfect. Let's use this to corroborate Alex's documents. I'll craft a subpoena to ensure compliance." I exhaled, tapping my mug against the table. Each legal maneuver felt like a chess move, advancing toward checkmate against Belle and her family. I spent the next hour compiling the envelope from Margaret, the file of Alex's offshore statements, and the timeline I had drafted. My printer word as pages slid out, emails, bank statements, the October 12th audio transcript. I organized them into a neat stack labeled in chronological order, then called Nadia to confirm our next hearing date. "We're closing in," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. "Stay sharp." After hanging up, I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest UPS store. Shipping 6 folders of evidence, complete with exhibits and affidavits, felt like sending a lifeline to the judge, a tangible thread tying our narrative together. As I sealed the last box, I noticed the clerk watching me with sympathetic eyes. I reminded myself of why I was doing this, not for retribution, but for justice, for protecting Sadie and our future. Back home, the afternoon sun filtered through half-drawn blinds as I settled into the home office, drafting an email to Jamie Holloway's listed address, if he was reachable at all, demanding an explanation for his involvement. I typed slowly, stating the facts clearly, his name on shell accounts, his laughter on the recording, and a request to confirm or deny association. Then I added, failure to respond will result in subpoena and potential charges. I paused, rereading the words. It felt surreal to confront a man I'd never met, but who had upturned my life. I pressed send, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. By early evening, a notification pinged. My email had been auto-forwarded to a generic no-reply server in the Cayman Islands. The message bounced back. I frowned, realizing we'd have to rely on legal compulsion to reach him. Nadia would need to know. The moment I heard the front door click, my heart leapt. Sadie flew into my arms, her small frame nearly engulfed by my open coat. "Daddy," she chirped, holding up her little shoe with a missing lace. "Miss Karen said I was brave today. I made a new friend named Lucas." Her excitement crackled like electricity. I kissed her cheek and asked about the lace, promising we'd fix it after dinner. I warmed up leftover spaghetti with the last of our butter and cheese, and we sat together on the couch as she recounted every detail of her day, the new friend, the finger painting, the snack she swapped for my string cheese. I listened, nodding, savoring her words like medicine. Still, part of my mind ticked over the evening's tasks, scanning Alex's documents for digital backup, reviewing depositions for tomorrow's draft motion, scheduling a meeting with a forensic accountant to trace the paper trail further. As twilight settled, I tucked Sadie into bed. She clutched her giraffe and yawned. "Daddy," she whispered, "will Mommy ever come back?" The innocence in her question cut through me. "I don't know," I said, brushing her hair from her forehead. "But right now, you and I have everything we need. We're safe and we're together." She closed her eyes and drifted to sleep, trusting me without reservation. Left alone in the living room, the apartment felt too big, too quiet. I powered on my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd been building, columns for date, amount, recipient, and notes. I updated it with the envelope date from Margaret's card and the offshore transfer dates from Alex's records. The list stretched across months, a testament to the calculated precision of their plan. Each entry fueled my resolve. At 9:30 p.m., I drafted a summary for Nadia, compiled new financial timeline, evidence forwarded to Horizon Com Legal, bounced email to Jamie noted, guest list for tomorrow's hearing prepared. I hit send and leaned back, feeling the day's exhaustion sink in. The apartment lights glowed softly around me, illuminating the scattered evidence like stars guiding me through the darkness. I closed my eyes and pictured Sadie's peaceful face, her breathing even in sleep. In those dreams, she didn't worry about money or courtrooms. She just existed as a 5-year-old should. That vision steeled my purpose. Tomorrow, we'd stand before the judge again, backed by corporate records and forensic analysis, demanding accountability. This was more than protecting assets. It was protecting her childhood. Then I shut my laptop and headed to the bedroom. As I drifted off, I felt the weight of anticipation lifting, replaced by the quiet confidence of a father prepared to fight for his child, step by meticulous step, until every last wrong was righted. When Belle's flight touched down at Portland International, a knot of anticipation twisted in my chest. Nadia's restraining order was ready, paperwork in hand, and I met her at the arrival's gate. As she stepped through the sliding doors, her eyes widened at the sudden presence of a court officer beside me. Panic flickered across her face when she saw the paperwork. "I came to fix this," she stammered, voice trembling. I leveled my gaze, calm but resolute. "Then explain the withdrawals from last week," I said, pulling out the bank record showing a new transfer. Her mouth opened, then closed, words failing. The officer stepped forward with the order. "Miss Nolan, you're served." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded, too shocked to argue. I led her to the cafe across the hall for supervised visitation. Sadie peeked around a corner, eyes bright when she saw her mother. Belle knelt, reaching out, but Sadie hesitated. "Mommy drained my piggy bank," she whispered. Belle's shoulders slumped. I watched from across the table, pain and relief mingling in my chest. The restraining order was a barrier. But in that guarded moment, I realized the fight wasn't just legal, it was about teaching our daughter whom she could trust. Months have passed since the courthouse gavel fell in our favor, and in that time, Sadie and I have transformed our lives into something steadier, brighter. We moved into a cozy bungalow near Alberta Park, its pale blue siding and tidy garden reflecting fresh beginnings. During the day, I revived my freelance design business, taking on local clients for logos and website refreshes. Each paycheck replenished what was rightfully ours. Porch by porch, brick by brick, I rebuilt our savings. Evenings became our sacred time, reading bedtime stories beneath a soft lamp's glow, experimenting with new pancake recipes on Saturday mornings, tracing our hands in sidewalk chalk outside our front step. I watched Sadie's laughter bloom as she discovered fireflies and learned to ride her bike without training wheels. Her delighted cries echoed through the neighborhood, a joyous banner of resilience. Of course, legal battles continued, subpoenas for offshore records, depositions confirming Margaret's role in the financial conspiracy, asset recovery negotiations that dragged into late afternoons. But with Nadia's steady guidance, each obstacle became a victory. We reclaimed thousands, enough not only to cover the past debt, but to set aside for college and emergencies. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender, Sadie climbed into my lap with a drawing she'd just finished, our new home, a rainbow stretching overhead, and two stick figures holding hands. Beneath it, in careful script, she'd written, "Daddy's brave." I felt tears prick my eyes as I kissed her forehead. Belle's message had once been meant to break me with fear of eviction. Instead, it had ignited something stronger, a truth unshakable and enduring. In the wreckage of betrayal, I had found purpose and strength. And as the rain began to patter softly against our window, I realized that home isn't just a place. It's built on love, honesty, and the promise that we'll face any storm together. Story 2. I was mid-presentation to investors when my wife's brother walked in and said, "We're going with my concept instead." The room applauded. I closed my laptop, smiled, and said, "Enjoy the funding." 48 hours later, the CFO was begging at my door, and their faces went pale when they realized I'd already taken everything with me. You ever have one of those days where you wake up thinking, yeah, today's the day everything finally clicks, and by noon you're wondering if you're secretly living in a sitcom written by your worst enemy? That was me. Tuesday morning, caffeinated to the point of prophecy, wearing my one good suit, ready to pitch 3 years of blood, sweat, and PowerPoint slides to a room full of investors who smelled like old money and condescension. I practiced my presentation so many times that even my coffee maker could probably explain the stabilization algorithm. I walked into that glass-walled boardroom feeling like a man about to drop the mic. Instead, I got dropkicked by karma and loafers named Trent. Trent, my wife Amber's younger brother, was the kind of guy who'd walk into a funeral wearing sunglasses and call it networking. He had that frat boy confidence that came from never facing consequences, and a jawline that screamed, "My dad owns the company," which, technically, he did. Richard, my father-in-law, CEO of Brightline Tech and walking embodiment of the Old Boys Club, had built the company from the ground up, only to let his golden boy son run it into the ground at a much higher altitude. Anyway, there I was, clicking through my slides, explaining how our new system could stabilize wireless transmission even in fluctuating environments, when the door swung open like a courtroom drama entrance. Trent strolled in, all swagger and hair gel, holding a latte and zero shame. "Sorry to interrupt," Mason, he said, voice dripping with entitlement. We've decided to go with my concept instead. Now, when someone says something like that mid-presentation, your brain goes through stages. First is confusion, like maybe you misheard. Then comes anger, followed closely by that delightful cocktail of humiliation and disbelief that makes you wish the floor had a trapdoor. I stood there frozen for a second, staring at him, then at the investors, who were nodding like trained seals at SeaWorld. One of them, a guy with a Rolex that probably had its own zip code, even smiled and clapped. Brilliant pivot, Trent, he said. Pivot my ass. That man had just hijacked 3 years of my work with the finesse of a raccoon stealing fries. Amber was there, too, sitting near the end of the table, smiling, proud, supportive. But not of me. No, she was beaming at her brother, her eyes glistening like she'd just watched a rom-com ending. That hurt worse than the betrayal itself. She didn't even look guilty, just relieved, like someone who'd finally taken the training wheels off her family's favorite pet project. Me. I closed my laptop slowly, the sound echoing in that sterile boardroom like a mic dropped from hell. Everyone waited for me to blow up or make a scene, but I didn't give them the satisfaction. I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half and said, enjoy the funding. Then I walked out, calm, cool, and dying inside. I could practically hear Trent whisper to someone, guess he's finally done. Yeah, pal. But not in the way you think. The elevator ride down felt like descending into my own personal reboot episode. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked too calm for what I was feeling. Betrayed, embarrassed, furious. Pick one. I'd spent 3 years giving that company everything, from sleepless nights to missed anniversaries. And for what? To be replaced mid-sentence by a guy whose last big idea was to add emojis to the dashboard for user engagement. When I stepped out into the parking lot, the sun was bright and smug, like it was in on the joke. I sat in my car for a full minute, just gripping the steering wheel, wondering when exactly I'd become the disposable version of myself. People always talk about betrayal like it's a stab in the back. But honestly, it's more like being pickpocketed. You don't notice what's missing until you reach for it, your dignity, your respect, your wife's loyalty, and realize someone else walked off with it while you were too busy being polite. I drove home on autopilot, my brain replaying the scene over and over, rewriting it in ways where I had the perfect comeback. Oh, you're going with Trent's concept? Great. Does it come with a free crash and burn guarantee? Too late now. By the time I parked in front of our house, I'd already made peace with one fact: I wasn't just done with bright line tech. I was done being the family's punching bag. Amber was in the kitchen when I walked in, on the phone, probably bragging about her brother's genius. When she saw me, her face froze for a split second, surprise, maybe guilt, but then she smiled like nothing was wrong. Hey, babe, you left early. Yeah, I said, grabbing a beer from the fridge. Got replaced mid-sentence. Saves time, really? Her smile faltered. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. It's just business. Right? I said, taking a long sip. Just business. The family kind. She sighed, the way people do when they're trying to sound patient but really mean you're embarrassing me in my own kitchen. Mason, you're overreacting. Trent's concept just aligned better with the investor's direction. Trent's concept? I repeated. You mean my project with his name stapled on it? She crossed her arms. This attitude is exactly why Dad worries about you. You take things too personally. I laughed. Actually laughed. Yeah. Well, getting robbed in broad daylight tends to feel a little personal, Amber. She rolled her eyes and turned back to her phone. You'll thank us later. This could be good for the company. There it was. Us. Not me. Not even him. Us. The family unit that apparently had a secret membership card I never got. I looked at her, this woman I'd married thinking we were partners, and realized she wasn't even on my side of the chessboard anymore. I was just the expendable pawn who thought love could outrank bloodline. I finished my beer, tossed the bottle in the sink, and said, you know what? You're right. Thank you. You just saved me 3 more years of wasting my life. She frowned. Mason, don't be rash. But I was already walking out of the kitchen, not storming, not slamming doors, just walking. The quiet kind of anger that doesn't make noise because it's too focused. I went straight to the study, pulled open the bottom drawer, and stared at the files I'd kept. Notes, test logs, backup drives, all of it. My work. My real work. I smiled to myself. They could have the fake presentation, the investors' applause, and the empty headlines. I had the real formula, and that meant they'd come crawling back eventually. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Trent's smug face, Amber's approving smile, Richard's calculating stare. The whole performance played on loop like a bad commercial. Around 3 a.m., I got up, made a pot of coffee strong enough to remove paint, and opened my laptop. I started a new document titled Project Iron Core, independent version. The cursor blinked like it was daring me to start over. So I did. By sunrise, I'd outlined my next move. I wasn't going to rant online, sue anyone, or make a scene. That's what amateurs do. No, I was going to do what I did best, build something better, something they couldn't steal because they wouldn't understand it. Revenge wasn't about screaming louder. It was about smiling quieter. So yeah, that Tuesday started as the day I got replaced mid-sentence. But by Thursday, I'd already started writing the next chapter, one where the punchline was mine. And if Karma was listening, I was ready to make her proud. They say hindsight is 20/20, but in my case, it's more like 4K Ultra HD with surround sound and director's commentary. Looking back, the moment I accepted a family offer from Amber's dad, I basically handed him a leash and said, "Pull whenever you want, sir." I didn't see it then, of course. Back then, I thought I was stepping into opportunity. Joining Bright Line Tech sounded classy, like one of those sleek Silicon Valley companies where people ride scooters and pretend kombucha is a personality. Spoiler alert, it was less innovative startup and more family cult with quarterly reports. I'd worked my way up the hard way. My first job was fixing printers at a call center that smelled like burnt coffee and regret. Then I freelanced for a few tech firms, grinding out code while eating ramen that came in more flavors than dignity. So when Richard, my soon-to-be father-in-law, pulled me aside during our engagement dinner and said, "Mason, I could use a sharp mind like yours at Bright Line," I thought I'd just been knighted. The man wore tailored suits, had a voice that could sell ice to Antarctica, and reeked of cigar money and generational arrogance. "We're all family here," he said. That should have been the red flag. In corporate language, "we're all family here" translates to "we don't pay you enough to complain." So there I was, Mason, the loyal husband/engineer, bright-eyed and stupid enough to believe nepotism could work in my favor. I joined Bright Line with dreams of respect, collaboration, maybe even a corner office one day. Instead, I got fluorescent lighting, lukewarm coffee, and a front row seat to Trent's mediocrity on parade. He was the ideas guy. Every company has one. The guy who walks into meetings uninvited, throws out buzzwords like synergy and scalability, and then disappears right before the work starts. And guess who had to make those ideas actually work? Yeah. Yours truly. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself it was just part of earning trust, proving my worth, the usual self-delusion people use before they realize they're being exploited. Every week, Richard would give one of his motivational speeches to the team. "We're not just a company, we're a legacy." While I was in the back, mentally calculating how much caffeine it would take to survive the next sprint. The day I realized I was just free labor in a family-run circus started like any other Monday. Too early, too caffeinated, and too optimistic for what was about to hit me. I was halfway through debugging a module when Trent strolled into my office wearing designer sneakers and the confidence of a man who's never been told no. "Bro," he said, dragging out the word like it was a threat. "Dad wants to see the prototype." "Which one?" I asked, not looking up. "The one you've been working on," he said. "You know, my project." I looked up then. "Your project?" He grinned, that perfectly punchable grin. "Yeah, man. The stabilization module. The investors love it. I'm presenting it next week." For a moment, I thought he was joking. But Trent didn't joke about stealing credit. He did it as naturally as breathing. "You do realize," I said slowly, "that I wrote the entire code from scratch, right?" He waved his hand like I was interrupting his vibe. "We're family, Mason. What's yours is ours." If homicide were legal in small doses, I'd have qualified for parole by lunch. Still, I bit my tongue, mostly because Amber had been pushing the whole "it's just temporary" line. She said her dad respected my work, that he saw me as a future partner in the company. Partner? Right. I was the unpaid intern with better grammar. Her dad, Richard, was another piece of work. Imagine the monopoly man with a trust fund and a god complex. Every morning he'd walk through the office with his trademark smile, that kind of smug calm people get when they've never had to reheat leftovers. He'd stop by my desk sometimes, pat my shoulder, and say things like, "Mason, we're counting on you to keep us innovative." Translation: do all the work while I take the credit at the shareholder dinner. And don't even get me started on the company culture. Bright Line was less like a team and more like a reality show. Trent's girlfriend, Lexi, ran social media. His cousin, Greg, was head of HR, despite thinking HR stood for hot receptionists. Even Amber worked there, technically in marketing, though her main role seemed to be defending Trent from accountability. I swear nepotism in that office had its own employee ID. Every time I tried to raise concerns, Richard would say, "You're overthinking it, Mason. We're all family." I'd nod like an idiot while imagining a future where I invented a time machine just to slap my past self for believing him. Then came the week before the big betrayal, the one that kicked off my villain origin story. We had a major presentation scheduled, a pitch to land investors for a product that could literally change the wireless industry. I'd been perfecting the design for months, running simulations until my laptop sounded like it was training for a marathon. I submitted everything on the internal server, thinking my name would, actually stay on it. Guess what? The following Monday, a new version appeared. Same work, same format, but now the header said Concept Lead, Trent Collins. The lights hummed overhead, and the whiteboard was covered in my notes, equations, formulas, outlines. In the quiet, I finally said it out loud. I'm the free labor. It was both depressing and liberating, like realizing your favorite restaurant has been giving you food poisoning for years. I packed up that night with one promise to myself: never again. The next time I walked into that building, I wouldn't be their pawn. I'd be the guy holding the whole board. And if that meant smiling through fake meetings, playing along with Richard's We're All Family act, and letting Trent think he was the genius, fine. Let them dig their own hole. I'd be the one selling the shovels. So yeah, I didn't get here by luck. I got here by caffeine, unpaid overtime, and the sheer stupidity of believing family meant fairness. Brightline Tech wasn't just a company. It was a perfectly air-conditioned trap. But by the time I realized I'd walked into it, I was already planning my way out. Because if there's one thing I learned working for the Collins clan, it's that family might screw you over faster than a stranger, but they never see it coming when you screw back harder. You ever wake up the morning after a disaster and convince yourself it was all a dream? Yeah, that was me on Wednesday, for about 8 seconds. Then I saw the half-packed boxes in my living room, remembered Trent's smirk, Amber's "it's just business" speech, and, boom, back to reality. Population: one idiot husband who got professionally pickpocketed. I brewed my coffee like it owed me child support, triple shot, no mercy, and stared at my reflection in the microwave door. There it was. The face of a man who'd spent years saving a company that couldn't even save him a seat. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Probably Amber texting something tone-deaf like, "You'll find something new. Proud of you for being mature." Mature? Yeah, because silence is maturity when rage could file a police report. By 8:30, I decided to go back to the office. Not for closure, not for revenge, at least, that's what I told myself. I just wanted to collect my things before someone accidentally repurposed my desk into a shrine for Trent's greatness. I drove there on complete autopilot, windows down, the kind of morning sun that dares you to feel hopeful. My car stereo played some old rock track, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself this was a new chapter. Maybe I'd start a consulting firm. Maybe even teach. Then I pulled into the parking lot and saw the big Brightline logo shining like it was mocking me. My stomach dropped like it had seen the bill at a steakhouse. The lobby looked the same. Modern, sterile, pretentious. Glass walls everywhere, like the building was proud of having no secrets, except the big one they just pulled on me. Leia, the receptionist, spotted me immediately. Her eyes widened like she'd just seen a ghost haunting its own workplace. "Mr. Mason?" she whispered. "You okay?" "Fantastic," I said. "Just cleaning up the crime scene." Her lips twitched. "If you need me to fake a fire drill while you sneak out, I can." "Appreciate it," I said, giving her a small smile. "But I think the place will burn on its own soon enough." I walked down the hall to my office. Correction, Trent's new innovation workspace. According to the sign on the door, he'd actually renamed it. The audacity was Olympic level. Inside, it looked like someone had tried to stage a tech bro habitat. My plants were gone, replaced with a neon hustle hard sign. My ergonomic chair had been swapped for some Instagram-friendly beanbag that screamed unemployed in 6 months. I ignored the decor and went straight for my desk. Most of my stuff was still there, my notebooks, flash drives, a mug that said "World's Okayest Employee." Irony hits different now. I started packing quietly, but I could feel eyes on me. People walking by would slow down, pretending to check emails while sneaking pity glances. The rumor mill must have been working overtime. In corporate culture, watching someone fall from grace is better than Netflix. Then came the cherry on top. My so-called manager, Jeff, a guy who built his career entirely on forwarding my emails and calling it delegation, strolled in like he owned the place. "Hey, Mason, he said, too cheerful. Didn't expect to see you. Yeah, I said. I wanted to leave before you changed the Wi-Fi password. Quote. He chuckled, missing the sarcasm entirely. Listen, man. No hard feelings, right? Trent just connected better with the investors. Of course, I said, closing a box. They always love the guy with good hair and bad math. He frowned, clearly not sure if I was joking. Spoiler, I wasn't. Before he could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, mumbled something about a follow-up meeting, and bolted like a man allergic to confrontation. Typical Jeff, emotionally ghosting mid-sentence since 2016. I sat down for a moment, just to breathe, surrounded by the echoes of a job that used to mean something. Every scribble on the whiteboard, every sticky note, every dent in the desk, it was all me. Every sleepless night I spent making sure Trent didn't crash the project now looked like evidence in my own betrayal. My phone buzzed again. Amber. I sighed and looked. Her text said, Trent's presentation killed. Everyone loved it. My thumbs hovered over the screen for a second before typing, I bet. Then I tossed the phone onto the table like it was contaminated. The bitterness hit hard, the kind that makes your coffee taste like regret. I knew I had to leave before I said something unprintable to someone who didn't deserve the courtesy of hearing it. So I took one last look at the office, the desk that had seen more of my life than my own living room, and placed my company badge on top. I left it there like a calling card at a funeral. On my way out, Zara from research spotted me by the elevator. She was one of the few sane people in that building. You're leaving? She asked softly. Seems that way. Her expression tightened. You didn't deserve this, you know. Yeah, I said, pressing the elevator button. But life's not an HR department. She laughed, then frowned. For what it's worth, Trent's demo was rough. That got my attention. Rough? More like a tech apocalypse, she whispered. He was sweating through his shirt by the second slide. Half the code crashed on launch. You could smell the panic from the hallway. I smirked. Good. Hope the crash report sends him a thank you note. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open like the universe was cueing my exit. If he asks for help, Zara said, lowering her voice, what do I tell him? I grinned. Tell him to Google humility. The doors closed, and I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time that week, I felt something other than fury. I felt vindicated, because no matter how much they'd taken from me, they couldn't fake competence. I drove home slower this time, letting that petty little joy marinate. The sky was overcast, but I swear it looked brighter than usual. When I got back, Amber wasn't there. Probably out celebrating Trent's big win. Good. I needed quiet. I cracked open another beer, sat on the couch, and started flipping through my notebooks. Inside were pages of calculations, sketches, timestamps, all the proof I'd ever need that the core tech was mine. I'd kept backup logs, version histories, even cloud timestamps tied to my personal email. Every detail was airtight. As I looked through it all, something strange happened. I stopped feeling like a victim. I started feeling dangerous. There's a special kind of calm that comes when you realize the people who screwed you over are about to crash without you. They think they've won, but you're the only one holding the safety manual. It's like watching someone steal your car and knowing the engine blows up at 40 miles per hour. By evening, my phone had blown up with messages. Amber again, dinner tonight. Dad wants to talk. I stared at it for a full minute, then typed, tell him to talk to his new genius instead. Sent. Blocked. Freedom never tasted so satisfying. Later that night, as I boxed up the rest of my old work gear, I realized something. Every empire built on lies eventually collapses under its own ego. Brightline Tech was a house of mirrors, all flash, no foundation, and Trent had just set fire to the blueprint. As for me, I was finally out. No more fake family meetings. No more unpaid overtime. No more pretending I was part of something that only saw me as a tool. I poured another drink, raised it to the empty room, and said, to new beginnings, preferably ones that don't involve in-laws. Outside, thunder rumbled like the universe was toasting back. The next morning would bring phone calls, panic, maybe even a visit. But that night, sitting in my quiet apartment, surrounded by my own work, my real work, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. And for once, the only approval I needed came from the man in the reflection of my beer bottle. Tired, betrayed, but finally free enough to smile. Thursday morning, 9:02 a.m. I was halfway through making breakfast, if you can call black coffee and cold pizza a balanced meal, when my phone started buzzing like it owed someone money. I ignored it once, twice. But the third time it started vibrating off the counter like it had something to confess. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, that's a straight to voicemail situation, but something in my gut said, this will be good. I answered with my most uninterested voice. Yeah? Mason, buddy, it's Colin. The voice was frantic, shaky, the kind of tone you hear right before someone asks if you know CPR. I sipped my coffee. Colin. The CFO. The man who once told me to simplify my innovation speak because investors don't like big words. How could I forget? He laughed nervously. Right. Ha. Listen, man. We've got a situation. I leaned against the counter. Oh, do tell. Did Trent run out of hair product or metaphors? Colin didn't take the bait. It's the demo. The big investor meeting. It's not working. I pretended to gasp, clutching my imaginary pearls. Not working? You mean the revolutionary concept your golden boy developed all by himself? Look, Mason, he said, his voice cracking like a teenager at prom. We just need a few pointers. Maybe walk us through the build again. I swear it's urgent. The investors are flying in at 11. We can't afford another crash. I took a long sip, letting the silence marinate like fine revenge wine. Sounds serious. It is serious, he said, desperate now. Trent's freaking out. Richard's pacing the conference room. And Amber, well, Amber's trying to do damage control with Claire from the investor group. We need you, man. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. Oh, I bet you do. But see, the thing is, Colin, I'm kind of busy right now. My toaster is having a mental breakdown, and someone's got to supervise. Mason, please. Click. I hung up and grinned so wide I could have sold toothpaste. You know that deep, soul-level satisfaction that comes when karma finally does her job? That was me, standing in my kitchen with yesterday's pizza and a front row seat to poetic justice. For once, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel small. I felt like the guy who left the movie 10 minutes early, knowing exactly how it ends. Still, curiosity is a stubborn friend. I opened my laptop and logged into the Brightline internal news feed. I'd kept my credentials active, just in case. Sure enough, there it was. Investor demo postponed due to technical issues. Translation: Trent's masterpiece exploded on launch like a cheap firework. I scrolled through the comments section. Employees gossiping in coded corporate speak. Zorro, so. Anyone know what happened with the stabilization prototype? Leia, front desk, rumor says Trent unplugged something important. Devin_Joe, can confirm. He unplugged Mason. I nearly spit out my coffee. At 9:45, the phone buzzed again. Same number. I let it ring. Then it buzzed again. And again. Then Amber's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won again. Plus, I was dying to hear how she'd spin this. Hey, sweetheart, I said, dripping with fake cheer. How's the family empire? Mason, this isn't funny, she snapped. The demo failed completely. The code's broken and the investors are already here. Oh no, I said, feigning concern. That must be so stressful, having to rely on stolen work and all. She huffed. You're being childish. Probably, I said. But at least I'm not unemployed and a plagiarist. Mason, she hissed. Please, can you just come help? You know this affects me, too. Ah, there it was. The me card. Amber could turn global warming into a personal inconvenience. You mean your brother embarrassed the entire company and now your name's attached to the fallout? Her silence said everything. Amber, I said finally. I'm flattered you think I can fix Trent's mess, but I'm all booked up today. Got a lot of not saving idiots on the schedule. Then I hung up again, gently this time, out of respect for the art of satisfaction. For the next hour, I lounged on my couch watching reruns of Shark Tank, sipping my coffee while imagining the chaos over at Brightline. Richard pacing like a zoo lion. Colin sweating through his suit. Amber trying to look composed while Trent probably blamed the air conditioning. I almost felt bad. Almost. By 10:30, the texts started pouring in. Zara, Colin, even Jeff, all variations of please come back. My favorite was from Trent himself. Bro, we need you, bro. The same guy who erased my name off a 3-year project suddenly remembered we share pronouns. I didn't reply. Instead, I texted Zara privately, how bad is it? She replied instantly, imagine a dumpster fire. Now add fireworks and a live audience. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. Around 11, I put on some music and went back to my laptop. Not the Brightline stuff, my stuff. The real formula, The one I'd quietly rebuilt under a new name, Iron Core. Cleaner, faster, smarter. I had it documented, patented, timestamped. No one could touch it. Every line of code, every model refinement, every test result, mine. Theirs was a cheap imitation built on arrogance. My phone buzzed again. Colin, persistent as a telemarketer. I let it go to voicemail, then hit play just for fun. Mason, buddy, it's Colin again. Look, we're sorry, okay? Maybe we handled things badly, but you've got to understand, the company's on the line here. The investors are threatening to pull funding. Trent's losing it. Please, just come by for an hour. I'll make it worth your while. Whatever you want, we'll figure it out. I whistled. Whatever I want. That was rich, coming from a man whose idea of negotiation used to be free parking validation. Still, I'll admit, hearing him panic lit something inside me. Not pity. Power. The kind of power that comes from knowing your silence is more valuable than their begging. Around noon, I got dressed. Nothing fancy, just jeans and a t-shirt that said not my problem. I walked out to the balcony, phone in hand, and called Colin back. Mason, thank God. I cut him off. Hey, quick question. What's Trent doing right now? He's rewriting slides. The investors are waiting in the conference room. Cool, I said. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to tell him I said hi, then tell him I said no. And tell Richard to stop calling, because every time my phone buzzes, my hourly rate doubles. Mason, please. Colin, I interrupted. You had one job. Keep your house clean. Instead, you let a guy with the IQ of wet cardboard hijack my life's work. So now you get to clean up the mess without me. Mason, I'll pay. Oh, I know you will, I said, smirking. Just not me. Not anymore. Click. I turned off my phone and stared at the skyline. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Not the fake kind you practice in therapy, but the dangerous kind. The kind that comes when the people who wronged you finally realize they can't touch you anymore. My neighbor, an old guy named Ted, who smoked cigars and minded everyone's business, yelled from his balcony. You look too happy for someone on a work call. Retirement, I said. He laughed. Good for you, kid. Yeah. Retirement. From being everyone's fixer. From being taken for granted. From pretending I owed loyalty to people who'd sell me out for a LinkedIn post. By 2 p.m., I'd open my email. Sitting there like a cherry on top was one from Brightlines HR, formal notice, intellectual property rights inquiry. I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. They actually thought they could threaten me for taking what was already mine. I replied with a single line, don't worry. I didn't take anything. That's why you can't make it work. Then I attached a smiley face. Professionalism matters. And as I hit send, I realized something. Revenge wasn't always about destruction. Sometimes it was just about timing. The perfect moment when you choose not to save them. Because watching arrogance implode from a distance, that's the kind of therapy money can't buy. Phase 1 of poetic justice was officially complete. 2 hours after I told Colin to Google humility, I was sprawled on my couch, halfway through a rerun of Suits, enjoying the kind of peace only other people's chaos can bring. My coffee had gone cold, my phone was on airplane mode, and I was humming along to the theme song like a man whose enemies were finally paying their karmic bills. Then came the knock. Not a polite, excuse me, may I? Knock. No, this one sounded like the person on the other side had a personal grudge against wood. 3 rapid, heavy thuds, followed by silence. The kind of silence that says, open up, or I'll start using my forehead. I sighed. If that's another delivery scam, I swear. I opened the door. And there he was. Richard Collins, my father-in-law, CEO of Brightline Tech, destroyer of good moods. Except this time, he didn't look like a man in charge. His perfect hair was slightly out of place. His tie hung loose like it had given up on him, and there was a faint layer of sweat glistening on his forehead. It was like seeing a lion show up at your door wearing a flea collar. Mason, he said, with the calm tone of a man pretending he didn't just spend the morning in corporate hell. We need to talk. Do we? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Because last time we talked, you said, and I quote, this family doesn't tolerate emotional decisions in business. Seems like karma heard you. He forced a smile, the kind people wear at funerals. Look, son. Please don't, I said, holding up a hand. You lost son privileges the moment your actual son stole my project. His jaw twitched. Fine, Mason. I came here to make things right. I tilted my head. Is that so? Or did your Golden Boy Science Fair project explode in front of investors? His silence confirmed it. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the couch. Come in. But wipe your shoes, sarcasm isn't the only thing I don't want on my floor. He hesitated, then entered, looking around like the apartment was foreign territory, which, to be fair, it probably was. He didn't exactly visit the homes of the people who made him rich. I sat opposite him and let him speak first. Always let desperate men dig their own hole. Mason, he began, smoothing his tie like it might help him find dignity. The investors, well, they're considering withdrawing completely. Trent's demo malfunctioned. The system crashed multiple times. The backup presentation failed. Colin nearly fainted. Sounds like a normal bright line meeting, I said. His eyes narrowed. We can fix this. You can fix this. Ah, there it was. The compliment disguised as a command. I leaned back. You're right. I can. But the better question is, why should I? Because, he said quickly, this company is part of your legacy, too. Amber's legacy. Don't you want to protect what you helped build? I laughed, loud, genuine, the kind that fills the room and makes the other person realize they've lost control of the conversation. Richard, the only thing I built there was unpaid overtime and trust issues. His composure cracked for a moment. You're being unreasonable. Unreasonable? I repeated. That's rich, coming from a man who let his son plagiarize me in front of a live audience. He sighed heavily. Mason, we both know Trent made mistakes. But he's still family, and family deserves second chances. Ah, I said, raising a finger. But I'm family, too, right? Or did that membership expire when I stopped being useful? He went quiet. Then finally, he said the words I'd been waiting for. What will it take to bring you back? There it was, the sound of desperation dressed in diplomacy. I let it sit in the air for a moment. Name your terms, he said, leaning forward now, voice almost pleading. Salary, position, recognition, whatever it is, we can make it work. I smiled slowly. Okay. First term, Trent publicly admits he has the IQ of wet cardboard. His face froze. Be serious. I am, I said. Because that's what it'll take to balance the scales. Until then, I'm just watching this corporate car crash from a lawn chair. Mason, he said, his tone sharpening. This isn't a joke. People's jobs are on the line. And whose fault is that? I shot back. I spent years being told to stay in my lane. And now you want me to take the wheel because Trent can't drive without hitting a wall? He exhaled through his nose, clearly fighting back the urge to say something regrettable. You're making a mistake. You can't take company research with you. Everything you built at Bright Line belongs to Bright Line. I grinned, slow and deliberate. Don't worry. I didn't take anything. That's why you can't make it work. He blinked. Once. Twice. The realization landed like a brick. You didn't, he said quietly. Oh, I did, I replied. Just not for you. He stood up then, straightening his jacket as if that would restore the authority he'd just lost. You're playing a dangerous game, Mason. Then it's about time you learned how to lose, I said. For a second, I thought he might actually explode, the kind of silent rage where a vein pops and you start reevaluating your life choices. Instead, he just nodded stiffly. You'll regret this. I shrugged. Maybe. But at least I'll enjoy the view from this side of regret. He walked toward the door, but before leaving, he turned back. Amber won't forgive you for this. I smiled. Funny, she never forgave me for being smarter than her brother, either. Door closed. End of meeting. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where Richard had just stood, the great CEO of Bright Line, reduced to a desperate salesman trying to buy back competence. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the times he'd called me emotional when I challenged him in meetings, or the way he patted Trent on the back for stealing my lines, and that sympathy evaporated faster than his company's market confidence. I sat back down, cracked open a soda, and turned on some jazz. The kind of smooth, arrogant music that makes victory feel cinematic. My phone buzzed again. A text from Amber. Dad came to see you. Please tell me you didn't make it worse. Me? Oh, absolutely. It's my new hobby. She didn't reply. Instead, a few minutes later, I got a call from Zara. Okay, she said breathlessly. Whatever you did, it worked. Richard came back from your place looking like he aged 10 years. The investors are threatening to walk, and Trent's in the restroom crying. Not even kidding. I grinned. Well, at least something's functioning in that building. Mason, she said, lowering her voice. This is chaos, but it's beautiful chaos. Just wait, I said. The best part's still coming. Please tell me you're not planning arson. Nope, I said, stretching my legs. I'm planning entrepreneurship. That night, as the city lights flickered outside my window, I started drafting the final blueprint for Iron Core Labs. My own company. My own tech. No stolen credits, no family politics, no fake smiles, just my work, my name, and my rules. By the time midnight rolled around, I'd already registered the domain and written a tagline, built on integrity. Powered by revenge. And the best part? I wasn't even angry anymore. Just amused. Because when people like Richard and Trent hit rock bottom, they don't realize it's not gravity that pulled them there, it's ego. So yeah, a visitor named Desperation came knocking that day. I welcomed him in, offered him a seat, let him talk himself into a corner, and sent him home empty-handed. It felt like redemption served at room temperature, with a side of petty satisfaction. By Friday morning, I was sitting at my favorite cafe, the one with Wi-Fi strong enough to download Karma in HD, nursing my 4th cup of coffee and wondering what victory was supposed to feel like. Turns out it feels a lot like caffeine-induced arrogance. The Bright Line saga was imploding faster than a reality TV marriage, and I was just the guy in the audience with popcorn and screenshots. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked Claire Dean, one of the lead investors from the Bright Line fiasco. You know those people who look expensive even when they're just ordering a latte? That was Claire. She wore her wealth like it was tailored, because it probably was. When I'd seen her before, she was sitting in the front row at that disaster of a presentation, pretending to look impressed while Trent confused a metric for a metaphor. Mason, she said as she approached, voice calm but eyes sharp. Thanks for agreeing to meet. Hey, no problem, I said, gesturing to the seat across from me. I charge extra for short notice consultations, though. She smiled faintly and sat down. Let's start with the obvious. What the hell happened in there? I leaned back. Corporate plagiarism with a side of incompetence. Her brow arched. So Trent really had nothing to do with the project? Trent thinks API is a new social app, I said. So no. Not a damn thing. Claire exhaled, rubbing her temples. That explains why the code crashed before we even hit the demo stage. Yeah, I said. Turns out, pretending to be smart isn't the same as being smart. Who knew? She stared at me for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. Can you prove it? I sipped my coffee. I can do better than that. I pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. I can show it. Her eyes flicked down at the drive like it was the Holy Grail. What's this? The real formula, I said, lowering my voice. The original stabilization code, the one that actually works. You kept it? Of course, I said. You think I'd let those idiots take my life's work without a backup? Please. I may be a fool in love, but I'm not suicidal. She chuckled, shaking her head. I have to admit, this is bold. Bold? I said. Claire, they stole my work and tried to repackage it with Trent's name on it. I'm just repossessing my dignity one bite at a time. Her gaze softened, but only slightly. Who owns this tech? Legally speaking. I do, I said without hesitation. Independent development, time-stamped, documented, backed up, notarized, and occasionally cursed at between 2 and 4 a.m. I've got every email, every build log, and every version saved going back 3 years. It's mine. She raised a brow, clearly impressed. You were planning this? Planning? No, I said. Paranoid? Always. She laughed quietly, but there was something calculating behind her smile. You realize this puts you in a very powerful position. Mason, Bright Line's investors aren't just mad. They're humiliated. Richard's been dodging calls since yesterday. Trent's been disinvited from every board dinner in the city. I couldn't help grinning. So you're saying it's my time to shine? I'm saying, she said, leaning forward, we'd rather put our money behind someone competent. Someone like you. Now, if my coffee hadn't already woken me up, that sentence sure did. Come again? Claire smiled. I represent a few investment partners who were very interested in your project before it went off the rails. We're not tied to Bright Line anymore. We want the real deal, the functioning product. The working version. You. I stared at her, trying not to look too smug. You're offering to back me directly. She nodded. If you can demonstrate that what you have actually works, yes. I took a long breath, pretending to think while internally screaming, holy hell, this is happening. You'll have your demo, I said. But I'm not stepping foot in Bright Line again. Good, she said, smiling. We'd rather you didn't. You'll present independently. Fresh name, clean slate. I already have one, I said, fishing a sleek black business card from my pocket and sliding it to her. Iron Core Labs, LLC. Officially registered yesterday. Her eyebrows shot up. You work fast. I smirked. Petty men are efficient. She laughed again, shaking her head. Send me a full presentation deck by tomorrow. If it checks out, we'll set up a meeting Monday morning. Done, I said, shaking her hand. And don't worry, this one won't crash halfway through. As she left, I watched her slide into a black car that probably cost more than my apartment complex. For a moment, I just sat there, letting it sink in. My so-called downfall had just flipped into a comeback. Trent stole my project. Richard buried my reputation. Amber stood by watching. And somehow, all of that had led me here, in a cafe, being courted by the very people they'd tried to impress. I couldn't resist sending a quick text to Zara. Guess who just got investor backing for Iron Core Labs? Her reply, holy hell. Are you serious? Serious as a heart attack at a barbecue. She sent 10 fire emojis and a please hire me. I laughed. Maybe I would. That afternoon, I holed up in my apartment, music blasting, laptop open, a fresh file titled Iron Core _investor deck _prk.pptx. Within hours, I had the whole presentation built. Polished slides, live demo video, clean graphs, the works. Every click felt like rewriting history. Halfway through the process, my phone buzzed. Amber again. I ignored it the first time. And the second. Finally, curiosity won. I opened the message. Heard you met with Claire. What are you doing, Mason? Don't make this worse. I laughed so loud I scared my neighbor's cat through the wall. Worse? Oh, sweetheart. This was worse for her family. I typed back, just building something that actually works. Try it sometime. Then I muted her. By evening, I sent Claire the deck along with a note, prototype ready for live demo. No fireworks, no plagiarism. Minutes later, she replied, Monday, 9 a.m. downtown. Don't be late. I closed my laptop, sat back, and let out a long breath. For the first time in months, I felt that electric thrill. Not revenge, not anger, purpose. The kind that keeps you up at night, but in a good way. The kind that says, you're back. Around midnight, I poured myself a drink and went out onto the balcony. The city lights stretched out below, bright and restless, like ambition itself. My phone buzzed one last time that night. Zara again. Just heard Richard yelling in the office. Something about betrayal from within. Colin looks like he's aged 10 years. Trent's hiding in the break room. It's beautiful chaos. I grinned at the message, took a sip, and whispered, and it's only just begun. That night, as I shut off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired, sure, but smiling. The kind of smile that comes from surviving the storm and realizing you're the thunder now. By Friday morning, Brightline Tech was trending for all the wrong reasons. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree with notifications, news alerts, texts, and even a meme someone made of Trent with the caption, when you copy your homework but forget to change the name. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I was still in bed, half under the blanket, holding a cup of coffee like it was an Oscar, scrolling through the chaos when Zara texted me. Trent blames the software. Richard just broke his golf mug. Amber's crying in HR. I couldn't help it. I started laughing so hard I spilled half my coffee on the sheets. Worth it. Brightline's downfall was happening in real time. And I didn't even need popcorn, I was full on caffeine and petty satisfaction. The company that once told me I lacked leadership initiative was now falling apart because their actual leadership thought competence was optional. By 10, Colin had tried calling 5 times. I ignored every single one. Let the man sweat. Let him earn his panic. Around the 6th attempt, I finally picked up, mostly because I wanted to hear how bad it really was. Mason, he practically yelled. Buddy, we need to talk. Still busy supervising my toaster's recovery, I said, cutting him off. Make it quick. He sighed, defeated already. It's bad, man. Investors pulled half their commitment. The demo crash went viral. Someone leaked part of the meeting recording online. Someone? I asked, raising an eyebrow even though he couldn't see it. You mean the entire internet? He ignored that. Richard's furious. Trent's threatening to resign. Wow, I interrupted. You mean he's finally volunteering to do something useful? Mason, this isn't funny, he groaned. We're sinking. Yeah, I said. Karma's got good aim. He went quiet. I could almost hear him staring at the wall, questioning his life choices. You really won't come back? Colin, I said, smiling into the phone. The Titanic already hit the iceberg. I'm just selling life jackets at a discount. Then I hung up. I swear the satisfaction of ending that call should be bottled and sold as therapy. After that, I decided to get some air. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my laptop, and went to a nearby cafe, the same one where I'd met Claire. The place was buzzing, and not just from espresso. A few people at a nearby table were actually talking about Bright Line. Did you see the video? That CEO guy looked like he was about to cry. I heard the investors walked out halfway through. Man, that's what happens when you fake it till you break it. I sipped my latte and smiled like the universe's favorite audience member. My phone buzzed again. Zara, my unofficial correspondent, was back at it. Colin just blamed the janitor for bad energy. Trent locked himself in his office. Amber's asking if you're behind this. Tell her I'm too busy being awesome. A few seconds later, Zara sent a photo, Amber sitting in HR, mascara smudged, eyes red. I zoomed in. Not out of cruelty. Okay, maybe a little, but because it was poetic. The woman who once told me I was too emotional for business decisions was now sobbing because her family's empire was crumbling faster than a dry cookie. I texted back, the irony is strong with this one. By noon, I'd switched from coffee to iced tea and from quiet satisfaction to full-blown scheming. I'd already sent Claire everything she needed for the investor meeting on Monday. But the Bright Line implosion was a free show, and I wasn't about to look away. I opened the news again. Headline after headline. Bright Line Tech faces investor exodus after failed demo. Richard Collins silent amid corporate collapse. Anonymous source claims stolen research behind Bright Line's downfall. Anonymous source, huh? Wonder who that could be. My phone rang again. Amber this time. I stared at the screen for a good 10 seconds before answering. Hey, sunshine, I said. How's the circus? Mason, she said, voice trembling. I'm trying to fix this, but the investors won't even talk to Dad. What did you do? I smiled. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're asking. Mason, this is serious. Our reputation is ruined. Our? I interrupted. Amber, when your brother stole my work, it became your family's problem. I'm just enjoying the rerun. Please, she said, voice breaking. Can't you just help them? They'll make it right. I leaned back, taking another slow sip. I did help, Amber. For 3 years. They didn't want my help then. Now they can enjoy the sequel. She was silent for a long time. Finally, she said, you're cruel. No, I said softly. I'm consistent. Then I hung up again. God, that was becoming my favorite part of the day. Around 2 p.m., Zara sent another update. Trent tried to demo again to prove himself. It froze on the first slide. Colin threw a pen at him. What a time to be alive. Also, Amber's packing up her desk. I blinked at that last one. Amber quitting? That was new. Why? I asked. She said something about not watching her family embarrass itself anymore. Then she started crying again. I didn't reply to that one. Not because I didn't care, okay, fine, maybe a little, but because it hit me how far things had gone. I'd spent years trying to earn respect from people who thought nepotism was a leadership trait. And now, watching them implode without me, I realized I never needed them. The funny thing about revenge, it doesn't feel like revenge when it's deserved. It feels like symmetry. By evening, Bright Line's PR department had released a statement, some robotic nonsense about technical complications and ongoing reviews. The internet wasn't buying it. Twitter was roasting them alive. One user posted, Bright Line Tech, now featuring 100% more downtime. Another wrote, should have invested in Mason instead. I took a screenshot of that one and set it as my lock screen. Then, as if the day wasn't already perfect, Zara called me. Okay, listen, she said, her voice breathless. They're panicking. Like, DEFCON 1 levels of panic. Richard's yelling at Colin. Colin's yelling at everyone. HR is hiding. It's total chaos. I'm going to need you to record that, I said. She laughed. You're enjoying this way too much. Zara, I said, smiling, I've earned this joy. I deserve an Emmy for surviving that company. She snorted. You really did. Anyway, word is Richard's going to try and call you tonight. Oh, he already did, I said. Door-to-door delivery of desperation. There was a pause. You didn't agree to help him, right? Please, I said. You think I'd give up front row tickets to my own redemption arc? Just checking, she said, laughing. Because honestly, I'm rooting for you. Always have been. Good, I said. You'll be getting a better job offer soon. When I hung up, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that used to live in my chest had burned itself out, replaced by a calm sort of clarity. I didn't need to destroy Brightline. They were doing that perfectly fine on their own. All I had to do was exist, and succeed. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights blur into a quiet glow. Somewhere downtown, I imagined Richard sitting in his glass office, wondering where it all went wrong. Somewhere else, Trent was probably trying to code his way out of failure with Google open and tears in his eyes. And Amber, maybe she was finally realizing that loyalty to the wrong people is just another form of self-sabotage. As for me, I had Iron Core Labs and a meeting on Monday that would make everything official. The empire I'd once bled for was melting, and I hadn't lifted a finger. And damn, it looked beautiful in the flames. By Monday morning, I looked like the kind of man who'd finally slept through the apocalypse. Fresh shave, pressed shirt, and the kind of quiet grin that says, some people burn bridges. I build new highways. My presentation for Iron Core Labs was loaded, rehearsed, and about to hit the same crowd that had once applauded Trent like he'd reinvented physics. I walked into the downtown glass tower office Claire had booked. Panoramic view of the skyline, sunlight bouncing off every reflective surface like the universe itself had RSVP'd. The receptionist, polished and polite, asked for my name. Mason Reed, I said, adjusting my tie. Founder and CEO, Iron Core Labs. Her eyes flicked up in recognition. Oh, you're that Mason. I grinned. The one and only. Don't worry. I'm friendlier than my headlines. Inside the conference room sat the same investors who'd once clapped for Trent. Silver-haired men in designer suits. 2 women with tablets out like weapons. And Claire at the head, cool as ever. Except this time, the atmosphere was different. No Richard, no Trent. Just opportunity, caffeine, and payback. Claire gestured. Gentlemen, this is the man who actually built what you thought you were buying. Pleasure, I said, setting up my laptop. Let's skip the buzzwords. Here's what actually works. When the demo began, I didn't just show slides. I showed results. Live data streams. Real-time simulation. The stabilization module flickered on screen, running smoother than a politician dodging questions. The investors leaned forward like kids watching fireworks. So, I said, pacing slowly. Unlike the other version, also known as the Titanic, this system doesn't crash when you look at it funny. It self-adjusts using predictive modulation. No freezing, no lag, and definitely no tears in the restroom. The room chuckled. Claire hid a smile behind her coffee cup. One of the men, a billionaire type with a tie that probably had a trust fund, asked, so you're telling us this is the original tech Brightline tried to sell? Not quite, I said. This is the improved version, built from the same foundation, except this time, the builder actually knows what he's doing. Laughter rippled through the room. Claire gave me a subtle nod. The you nailed it kind. I kept the demo rolling. The live system handled every stress test I threw at it. Not a single glitch. By the end, even the skeptical ones looked impressed. One woman whispered, flawless. Claire leaned back. So, Mason, what are you asking for? I clicked to the next slide. Clean, bold letters, Iron Core Labs, independent. Secure. Scalable. I'm asking, I said, for you to invest in innovation that's not built on nepotism. I don't need their old company. I don't need their approval. What I need are partners who value results over family trees. Applause. Real, genuine applause, not the fake we're networking kind. Claire smiled wider than I'd ever seen her. Well, she said, I think we found our new lead innovator. The contracts came out next, thick, crisp, and gloriously official. I signed each page with the same satisfaction you get when unsubscribing from an ex's Netflix account. After the meeting, Claire pulled me aside. That was brilliant. I shrugged. 3 years of forced humility will do that to a guy. She laughed. How does it feel? Like justice with a caffeine buzz, I said. You ever see someone get fired in slow motion? Because that's what's about to happen to Brightline. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her an email I'd just received. Breaking news, Brightline Tech halts operations pending audit. She blinked. You leaked something, didn't you? Who, me? I said innocently. I just reminded a few reporters that the revolutionary demo was stolen intellectual property. They did the rest. Claire smirked. You're dangerous. Only when provoked, I said. Outside, I walked into the sunlight feeling 10 pounds lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't someone's employee or someone's in-law project. I was my own showman. I headed straight to my car, rolled down the windows, and turned up the radio. The announcer's voice cut through the static. In tech news, Brightline Tech faces massive backlash after reports of internal misconduct and product theft. Sources claim a former engineer, Mason Reed, may have been the rightful creator of their failed product. I actually laughed out loud. Former engineer? Huh? Try upgrade. My phone buzzed again. Zara, naturally. They're losing their minds. Richard's been in meetings all day. Trent's hiding. Amber's threatening PR lawsuits. And I just got funded. No way. Iron Core? Iron Core. Signed and sealed. Holy crap, Mason. You did it. Correction, we did it. You're getting a job offer soon. Her reply was all caps and celebratory emojis. By lunchtime, I was walking into a rooftop restaurant, phone buzzing nonstop with congratulations from old coworkers, friends, even one or two Brightline employees who jumped ship mid-synergy. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was the rumor true? Oh, it was true. And I was loving every second of it. I ordered a burger, toasted my success with a Coke, and replayed the week's events in my head like a highlight reel. Me walking out of that boardroom in humiliation. Richard begging at my door. Trent crying into his PowerPoint. Amber realizing her last name wasn't a career. And now me, signing multi-million-dollar contracts under a new name. When the waitress brought the bill, she smiled. Are you the guy from the news? I chuckled. Depends. Do I look guilty or successful? Successful, she said. The guilty ones don't tip well. I left her 20%. Petty men have class, too. That evening, I drove home through downtown traffic, phone still buzzing with updates. A text from Colin popped up. You really did it. Congrats, man. Wish I'd backed you sooner. You wish, I typed back. And then another message, from an unknown number. We need to talk. Amber. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down. She could wait. I had better company now, success, vindication, and the faint sound of karma breakdancing in the distance. At home, I poured myself a drink, opened my laptop, and checked the new Iron Core Labs email account. Dozens of inquiries already, potential hires, partnership offers, press interviews. I smiled. This was how it should have been all along. As the city lights flickered on outside, I thought back to that day in the boardroom when Trent cut me off mid-sentence. That smug look, that applause, Amber's proud little smile. It was burned into my memory, but now it didn't sting. It was fuel. Because if he hadn't humiliated me that day, I might never have left. I'd still be fixing his broken code and pretending to be grateful. Instead, I'd become the guy who stole the spotlight back without even raising his voice. My favorite part? Watching them try to explain my success to the press. He was a valued team member. Right. The same team member they replaced with nepotism and ego. I opened one last message from Claire. Congratulations again, Mason. Investors are thrilled. Also, Brightline reached out. They want to meet. I said no. I laughed so loud my neighbor's dog barked. That night, sitting by my window, city glowing like a promise, I realized something simple but powerful. Revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes with contracts, applause, and the quiet click of a pen signing your name where theirs used to be. I'd returned, not with vengeance, but with proof. Proof that I was the real showman all along. And as far as comebacks go, mine deserved a standing ovation. It was late, somewhere between reasonable bedtime and emotional damage o'clock, when the knock came. I just finished sending the final payroll setup for Iron Core Labs, officially becoming the boss I used to dream about having. The apartment was quiet, jazz playing low in the background, a single lamp on. My drink sat untouched, because honestly, victory was intoxicating enough. Then came that knock. 3 soft taps, then 2 louder ones. Hesitant but desperate. You can always tell when guilt's the one knocking, it doesn't have rhythm. I sighed, muting the music. If that's the landlord asking for rent early again, I swear. I opened the door. Trent. He looked nothing like the smug, cologne-drenched ideas man who'd stolen my project and strutted around boardrooms like he invented oxygen. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes big enough to hold regret. He stood there clutching his phone, trembling slightly. You ruined me, he said, voice low, like he was scared of the truth echoing. I leaned on the doorframe. No, Trent. You ruined you. I just turned on the lights. He flinched. You don't get it, Mason. It's finished. Brightline's gone. Dad's yelling at clouds. Or maybe drafting another inspirational email about family teamwork, I interrupted. Don't, he snapped. Don't mock me. Oh, trust me, I said. This is me being merciful. The real mockery would have had slides. He groaned and dragged a hand through his hair. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to prove I could do something on my own. I raised an eyebrow. By stealing something that wasn't yours? Interesting brand of independence. Mason, please, he said, eyes darting around like maybe the neighbors were watching. You've got your new company, your big win. You don't need to destroy us. I folded my arms. Trent, the only thing I destroyed was the illusion that you knew what you were doing. He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was seeing a different version of me for the first time. You think you're the hero in this? I smiled faintly. No. Heroes forgive. I build empires out of ruins. For a second, he looked like he wanted to swing at me. But the arrogance had drained out of him. Instead, he just exhaled shakily. Amber blames you for everything. I nodded. Yeah. She texted, said I humiliated her family. I told her, technically, you did that. I just provided the popcorn. His jaw clenched. You're enjoying this. You're damn right I am, I said. Do you know how many nights I stayed up fixing your garbage code while you were out drinking on daddy's dime? How many times I swallowed my pride so you wouldn't look incompetent in front of investors? You humiliated me in front of a room full of people, Trent. I walked out with nothing. So yeah, forgive me if I find this poetic. He stared at the floor. For once, he didn't have a comeback. Dad's been trying to call you, he muttered. I bet he wants to make you an offer. Tell him my rates doubled after I stopped caring. He looked up, frustration flickering behind the exhaustion. Mason, what do you want from us? I shrugged. Nothing. That's the point. I don't want your company, your money, or your name attached to mine. I just want you to live with the fact that the guy you replaced mid-sentence is the same guy whose name is now trending under hashtag Iron Core Revolution. His lips parted like he was about to say something, then closed again. He had no fight left. Just fear. After a long silence, he said softly, I messed up. I nodded slowly. Yeah. You did. Can you ever forgive me? That one hit differently. It wasn't fake, not performative. For the first time in his spoiled, entitled life, Trent sounded like a man who'd finally seen his reflection without the family name fogging it up. I took a breath. Trent, forgiveness isn't my currency anymore. I trade in lessons. And you've just had the most expensive one of your life. He looked like he might cry. I wasn't about to offer tissues. Some lessons need salt water. He nodded quietly, stepping back. Good luck, Mason. Already got it, I said, and shut the door. The click of the lock echoed like punctuation. Full stop. End of chapter. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. The funny thing about closure is it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, the kind that tells you there's nothing left to prove. I poured myself a drink and walked to the window. The city lights looked different now. Less like a battlefield, more like a blank canvas. My phone buzzed again. Amber. I almost ignored it, but curiosity is a stubborn little demon. You humiliated my family. Your brother did that, I typed back. I just built a better product. A pause. Then, we're over, Mason. You've made that clear. Good. I needed the reminder. I didn't block her. Not this time. She wasn't worth the energy it took to hate her anymore. I turned off my phone and sat on the couch, feeling something new. Peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with people who refuse to understand. But peace didn't mean passivity. I had work to do. Big work. Iron Core Labs wasn't just a rebound project. It was the future, the kind of company that valued brains over bloodlines. I opened my laptop again. The screen cast a soft glow across the room. On my homepage, investor confirmations, signed contracts, early product interest. It was happening. Everything Brightline pretended to be, Iron Core was becoming, for real. Still, curiosity tugged at me. I opened the news. Headline, Brightline Tech officially declares bankruptcy following investor exodus. Below it, a picture of Richard standing outside his office, reporters swarming. The man looked small. Defeated. The caption read, a company once valued at $400 million now under investigation for mismanagement and IP theft. I took a sip of my drink. Guess the universe handles audits, too. Scrolling further, I found another headline, former Brightline engineer launches Iron Core Labs, attracts record funding. And just like that, there it was, side by side. Their failure. My rise. The poetic symmetry was almost cinematic. I leaned back and let out a deep laugh. One that came from somewhere real, the kind that feels like an exhale after holding your breath for too many years. A knock startled me again, lighter this time. I half expected Trent to return with more apologies, but when I opened the door, it was a courier holding an envelope. "Delivery for Mr. Reed," he said. I signed, thanked him, and closed the door. Inside the envelope, because the universe loves drama, was a legal notice. Bright Lines lawyers, cease and desist regarding the Iron Core prototype. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. They were really trying this again. I grabbed a pen and scrawled my response across the first page in bold marker. Already patented. Already funded. Already yours to figure out. Sincerely, the guy you underestimated. I snapped a photo of it and emailed it to Richard's office. Then I poured another drink, raised it toward the ceiling, and said quietly, "To poetic justice." Somewhere downtown, Bright Line's last lights were flickering out. And here I was, alive, unbothered, thriving. The knock of defeat had come to my door tonight, wearing the face of a man who once stole my voice. And I answered it, not with anger, but with a smile. Because this time, I didn't need revenge. I was the revenge. 48 hours. That's how long it took for everything to come full circle. 48 hours ago, I was the guy everyone at Bright Line whispered about in pity, the poor bastard who got replaced mid-sentence by his wife's brother. Today, I was on the cover of Techfront Weekly, holding a cup of coffee like it was a trophy, under a headline that read, "Iron Core Labs, the Phoenix startup that rose from corporate ashes." If poetic justice were a flavor, I'd be licking the spoon. The article was brutal, for them. The journalist didn't pull punches. The first paragraph compared Bright Line's collapse to a family-run theme park catching fire while the owners argued over who forgot to feed the lions. I almost framed that line. I was sitting in my apartment, which now doubled as Iron Core HQ, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and the faint hum of the city outside. My inbox was overflowing. Investors, reporters, people who used to ignore me at networking events now suddenly wanted a quick call to discuss potential synergies. Translation: we didn't believe in you when it mattered, but now that you're winning, can we breathe near your success? My phone buzzed. Colin again. I picked it up this time, purely for entertainment value. "Mason," he said, voice cracking. "Please tell me you've seen the news." "Oh, I've seen it," I said, spinning lazily in my chair. "It's my new favorite bedtime story." "This is bad, man," he said, panic seeping through the line. "Richard's losing it. We're completely out of funding. The board's resigning. I don't even know who's still technically employed." "That's wild," I said, feigning sympathy. "Almost like firing your smartest employee and replacing him with a haircut was a bad idea." He groaned. "Look, you made your point. But we need help. The patents, the prototypes, everything's tangled. The lawyers are circling. If we don't find a way out." "Colin," I said, cutting him off. "Buddy, listen carefully. You're trying to save a building that's already rubble, and I'm the guy selling blueprints for skyscrapers." He was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, "Richard wants to make you another offer. Triple what you were making before. Full rights. Full recognition." "Recognition?" I repeated. "You mean the kind where they pretend I never existed until it's convenient?" "Yeah, no, thanks. My coffee machine gives me more recognition." "Mason, please." "Colin," I said, my tone soft but final. "It's over. Tell Richard the funding he's begging for, it's already coming to me." Then, with the kind of satisfaction you can't fake, I hung up. I leaned back, exhaled, and grinned. It's already coming to me. That was my victory lap. 3 years of quiet humiliation, all paid off in a single mic drop. But the universe, apparently, wasn't done giving me encore moments. At precisely 9 a.m., there was a knock at my door. Not a timid one, firm, corporate, expensive. I opened it and found myself looking at a man in a dark navy suit, holding an envelope with the Bright Line logo barely visible under a coffee stain. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Mason Reed?" he asked. "Depends," I said. "You here to sue me or congratulate me?" He didn't blink. "Both, probably." "Cool," I said, stepping aside. "Come on in. I've got coffee and moral superiority." He handed me the envelope, official notice from Bright Line's legal department. I tore it open while he stood there fidgeting. Inside was a cease and desist letter, again claiming that Iron Core's tech potentially infringed on Bright Line's proprietary intellectual property. I read it once, then laughed so hard the poor guy jumped. "You're serious? They're still doing this?" I'm just the messenger, he said quickly. They also asked if you'd consider a meeting to amicably resolve things. Amicably, I repeated, smiling. That's lawyer speak for we are desperate and can't afford the lawsuit. He looked like he wanted to vanish. So should I tell them? Tell them I'll meet, I said. His eyes widened. But not at their office. They can come here. I like home field advantage. He nodded nervously and left. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Private number. I answered. Mason. Richard's voice, gravelly, tired, humbled. 3 words I never thought I'd use about that man. We appreciate you agreeing to talk. I didn't agree to talk, I said. I agreed to watch you squirm in person. There's a difference. He sighed. You've made your point. We made mistakes. Plural, I said. Lots of them. Some in PowerPoint. I'm not here to fight, he said. We're offering a buyout. 50% ownership of Iron Core in exchange for merging under the Bright Line umbrella. You'd have full operational control. I nearly spit out my coffee. So you want me to take the company you killed, strap it to mine, and call it teamwork? Mason. Richard, I interrupted. Do you hear yourself? Bright Line isn't an umbrella. It's a burned down tent. He went quiet. Then, you won't last without a larger infrastructure. I laughed. You said the same thing about the internet in 2003, didn't you? Silence. Then the line clicked dead. He'd hung up, probably realizing that I wasn't coming back. Not for any price. By noon, the internet had decided Bright Line was officially cancelled. Employees were posting their resignation letters on LinkedIn like war trophies. One guy captioned his post, leaving the Titanic before it becomes a submarine. It had 12,000 likes. Claire called later that afternoon. Mason, I just got off a call with the board. You'll want to hear this. Let me guess, I said. They're dissolving, she said. Their investors are redirecting funds to you. I smiled. Good to know I'm a great recycling program. She chuckled. How does it feel to be the man who dethroned a family empire? I thought about it for a second. Honestly? Like I should start buying more comfortable chairs. Empires are overrated, but good lumber support is forever. We both laughed. After hanging up, I took a walk. The city was alive, buzzing, vibrant. The air smelled like rain and coffee beans. I stopped at a newsstand. And there it was again, Iron Core Labs, the startup that outsmarted legacy giants. I bought 3 copies. Not for ego. Just for history. As I crossed the street, my phone buzzed again. A text from Amber. You won. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling nothing. No, I typed. I just stopped losing. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. When I got home, I poured myself another coffee. I swear my bloodstream was 70% espresso at this point, and sat down to review Iron Core's new contracts. Everything was falling into place. Offices, staff, funding, freedom. Still, something tugged at me. A strange emptiness sitting underneath the victory. For so long, my drive had been fueled by anger, by the need to prove them wrong. Now that I had what I wanted. What next? I opened the window and stared at the skyline. The same one I used to look at after miserable workdays, wondering when my break would come. It came, all right, just with a side of fire and sarcasm. My doorbell rang again. This time, I was ready for anything. I opened it to find Zara standing there, holding 2 coffees and wearing a grin big enough to power a small city. Thought you'd need caffeine for whatever world domination plan you're working on, she said, handing me one. Bless you, I said. You're the only person who understands me. She looked around the apartment, cables, laptops, a whiteboard full of scribbles. So this is Iron Core HQ, huh? Smells like ambition and poor sleep hygiene. I smirked. We're going for a minimalist startup vibe. You know, small space, big dreams, no unpaid interns. She laughed. Well, consider me your first hire. But I want benefits and coffee that isn't reheated sadness. Deal, I said. We clinked our cups together like champagne. For the next hour, we sat side by side brainstorming logos, taglines, and ideas. She had that same spark I used to have before Bright Line beat it out of me. Pure creativity, unfiltered optimism. It reminded me why I started this in the first place. Halfway through, she looked at me and said, "You know what's crazy? You could have walked away quietly, found another job, but instead you built something better." "Yeah," I said. Because I realized something. Revenge fades. But legacy sticks. She smiled. "You think they'll ever recover? Bright Line?" I said, leaning back. Not unless they start selling cautionary tale subscriptions. We laughed again. And for the first time, it didn't feel like laughter born from bitterness. It was real. As evening settled, Zara left with a promise to come back tomorrow. I sat alone again, but this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. My phone buzzed one last time that night. A notification from an online news feed. Breaking: former Brightline CEO Richard Collins resigns amid investigation. Below it, a picture of him stepping into a car, face pale, expression hollow. The man who once told me I'd never understand leadership was now learning humility in real time. I took a sip of my coffee and whispered, "Lesson complete." Then I glanced around the room, the whiteboard, the laptop, the coffee mug that said "World's Most Stolen Genius." It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about evolution. About taking everything they tried to use against me and turning it into momentum. 48 hours earlier, I'd been a ghost haunting their failure. Now I was the future they couldn't buy back. And damn, it felt good to be alive. When I finally shut down for the night, I walked out onto the balcony. The city hummed below, indifferent, but full of possibility. Somewhere down there, new people were making the same mistakes, trusting the wrong bosses, letting the wrong people take credit. But somewhere else, a few were learning the same lesson I had. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you are without them. I raised my mug to the skyline. To the ones who doubted me, I said softly, "You built the fire. I built the forge." And as the night breeze hit my face, carrying the sound of distant traffic and possibility, I smiled. Not the bitter smile of a man getting even, but the calm, steady grin of someone who finally won by walking away. Because in the end, revenge wasn't in wrecking their company. It was in building mine. One sarcastic smile at a time. Story 3. For 4 months, my wife refused to touch me. Said she was too tired. Then at 1 a.m., I saw the blue glow from her phone bouncing off her pillow. She was texting someone. "I'm head of cybersecurity." I pulled the logs. The number saved as HR department belonged to our CFO. Seattle rain doesn't actually fall, it just hovers around you like a silent accusation. And on that particular Tuesday night in October, I could feel every molecule of that damp air pressing through the walls of our $3 million smart home while I lay flat on my back at 1:45 in the morning, staring at the ceiling like it had answers I hadn't asked for yet. My name is Ryan Coldwell. I put in 12 years with the Marines before moving into corporate cybersecurity. And I'll tell you this, the silence that can exist between two people sharing a bed at 1 o'clock in the morning hits harder than anything I ever encountered in a combat zone. Emily's back was facing me, same as it had been for 123 nights straight. And before you say anything, yes, I was absolutely keeping count, because that's just how my brain operates when the numbers stop making sense. 9 years of marriage teaches you things you never expected to learn, like the exact rhythm of your partner's breathing when they're actually asleep. And Emily wasn't asleep. Her shoulders were too rigid for that. And there was that unmistakable blue glow bouncing off her silk pillowcase, the one she'd insisted we absolutely needed because regular cotton was apparently beneath us now. She was texting somebody at 1 in the morning and pretending she'd been too wiped out to move. 6 months ago, the version of me from back then would have reached over, touched her shoulder gently, and tried to remind her of who we used to be, two people who couldn't fall asleep without being wrapped up in each other. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I cleared my throat, softly, just enough to signal that I was awake, and spoke to her in that particular careful tone that husbands use when they've learned to treat their own homes like minefields. She didn't flinch. Didn't even fake being startled. She just exhaled this long, heavy sigh, like I'd asked her to climb a mountain rather than simply acknowledge that I existed. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow, Ryan, please," she said. And her voice had this quality to it, I can only describe it as a door slamming in your face without anyone physically touching the door. Cold, clipped, irritated, like my presence on my own side of the bed was something she was barely putting up with. 4 months of this, and I'm not talking about the natural rhythm of marriage where sometimes life gets hard and the spark needs a little work. I mean 4 months of my wife treating the idea of touching me like I was carrying something contagious. 4 months of excuses that kept getting thinner and thinner until they were basically see-through. 4 months of watching the woman I'd built everything with slowly become a stranger who just happened to have my last name and use my address. The bed we'd once thought of as our private sanctuary had turned into a no man's land, and she'd made it very clear exactly which side of the line I was allowed to occupy. I got up without another word, because honestly, what was left to say, and made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the soft ambient glow of the smart lighting system I'd installed myself, because engineers do that. We see something that could work better and we fix it. Except whatever had broken between me and my wife was apparently outside my area of expertise. The kitchen calendar caught my eye, and something tightened in my chest when it hit me that today, technically, since it was already past midnight, was the anniversary of our first date. 9 years ago, I'd taken Emily to this small Italian place in the U District, the kind of spot with checkered tablecloths and candles jammed into old wine bottles, and she'd laughed at almost everything I said and looked at me like I was genuinely the most fascinating person she'd ever sat across from. The date wasn't circled on the calendar. She'd either forgotten or stopped caring. And honestly, I wasn't sure which one hurt worse. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in the dark, working through my water and listening to the rain, letting my mind run the way it always does, cataloging patterns, flagging anomalies. Because cybersecurity does something to the way you see the world. You start reading everything as a system. And when any part of a system starts behaving in ways it shouldn't, that's what we call an indicator of compromise. And my marriage, my entire domestic existence, was throwing up red flags like it was trying to win a competition. Morning came wrapped in that flat gray Seattle light that makes everything look like an old photograph taken through a foggy lens. I watched Emily get ready for work the way you'd watch surveillance footage, clinically, detached, looking for data. She spent 45 minutes picking out her outfit. That was 20 minutes longer than her baseline. And she was humming to herself, actually humming, like someone who had something genuinely exciting waiting for them. That something clearly wasn't me, and it clearly wasn't our anniversary she'd forgotten to acknowledge. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop and she was across the room before the second vibration, her entire body language snapping from casual to alert, the way someone moves when they're expecting a message they've been looking forward to. "Client from the Tokyo office?" I asked, keeping my voice completely flat as I sipped my coffee. "Rough deal with the time difference." She glanced up at me with those green eyes I used to think were beautiful and now mostly just read as calculating, and she gave me the professional smile, the one that stops well below her actual eyes. You know how it goes. Global business doesn't take days off. What I knew was that North Peak Energy had shut down their Tokyo operation 6 weeks earlier due to restructuring. What I also knew was that my wife had just looked me dead in the face and lied without the slightest hesitation. And what I knew above everything else was that the woman standing in front of me in her expensive dress and her designer heels was not the same person I had married. She'd become someone else entirely. Someone who looked through me like I was a piece of furniture. Someone who fabricated stories about phone calls, worked implausibly long hours, and came home carrying the scent of someone else's perfume and restaurant food I'd never been invited to share. After she pulled out of the driveway in the BMW she'd insisted we needed because her Lexus was apparently too embarrassing to be seen in at the North Peak garage, I sat down at my home office computer and got to work. I'm the head of cybersecurity at North Peak Energy. That comes with access to things most people don't even know exist, and more importantly, it comes with the skills to locate things that people are convinced they've buried. Some men in my position would have exploded, screamed, broken things, demanded the kind of answers that don't actually change anything. But I wasn't some men. I was a former Marine who'd spent 12 years learning that the first principle of any operation is intelligence. You never show your cards until you're ready to play the hand. First thing I did was pull the GPS data from Emily's company phone, which I had completely legitimate access to as the company's security administrator. What I found was interesting, in the way that things you already suspected being confirmed is a particular kind of interesting. On paper, her phone logged time at the office and at home, right where a dedicated marketing director's phone was supposed to be. But phones are leaky things. They leave traces in places people forget to think about. When I dug into the network logs, I found her phone had been pinging cell towers out near Bellevue on a consistent basis, specifically towers near a boutique hotel called the Silver Bay, the kind of place that's popular with executives who need a certain level of privacy more than they need a corporate discount rate. 40 extra miles a week on her odometer she couldn't account for. Regular visits to a hotel that had nothing to do with any marketing campaign I could find. And restaurant receipts for places serving oysters and champagne, which was notable because Emily had always told me she hated oysters. Said they reminded her of snot. Apparently her palate had changed, or more likely, someone else had been doing the ordering. The pieces started clicking together with the cold, mechanical precision of a puzzle you desperately wish you could stop working on but can't. The new gym habit. The hotel lobby perfume she'd started wearing. The way she'd started calling me Ryan instead of the nickname she'd used for years. The wardrobe upgrades. The late nights. The business trips that didn't line up with anything on her actual schedule. Every single detail was another data point in an equation I didn't want to solve but couldn't stop myself from calculating, because that's the part of my brain I can't turn off. It finds the truth whether I want it to or not. That night I stayed late in the server room at work. Nobody questioned it, I stayed late regularly and the hum of the servers was almost meditative, like white noise for a mind running at full speed. I sat under the blue glow of multiple monitors and pulled up the communication logs for North Peak's corporate phones. As head of security, I had metadata access for compliance and emergency purposes. What I found in those logs made my blood go cold in a way that a combat zone never quite managed. Emily's contact-labeled HR department had been racking up significant activity, which would have been perfectly unremarkable if that number had actually belonged to HR. Instead, it belonged to Nathaniel Blake, our chief financial officer. The kind of guy who wore his success like a weapon, laughed too loud at his own jokes, wore watches that cost more than some people's mortgages, and moved through every room like everyone in it was auditioning for his attention. Nate Blake was also married. 3 kids. A wife who organized charity events and smiled for camera phones at company gatherings with the patient expression of someone slowly figuring out what they'd agreed to. I pulled their message history, and as I read through months of exchanges, I felt something fundamental shift inside me, the kind of deep internal movement you feel in your chest before you consciously understand what's happening. The messages started professionally enough, marketing talk, budget discussions, quarterly projections. Then they evolved, the way these things always do, into something else entirely. Inside jokes. Late-night messages. Conversations that made it perfectly obvious they weren't just reviewing spreadsheets over their working dinners. The one that hit me hardest was a message from 3 weeks earlier. My wife, the woman I'd stood in front of and made promises to, had written to her boyfriend, "That old fool Moore won't notice a thing. We can push through another 50 grand before the quarter closes." His response asked about the soldier boy at home, and her reply came back calling me harmless. A nobody who would be out of her life once the bonuses cleared. Harmless. A nobody. There it was in black and white, not suspected, not implied, but documented. The actual truth of how the woman I'd loved for nearly 10 years had come to see me. Not as a husband. Not even as a real obstacle. Just a placeholder. Something warm in the house while she built her actual life somewhere else. I sat in that server room for a long time. Just breathing. Just letting it all land and rearrange itself into something I could actually work with. An earlier version of me, younger, before I'd learned what uncontrolled emotion costs you in dangerous situations, might have driven straight home and detonated the whole evening. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I understood with total clarity that the woman I'd married had been gone for a while already, replaced by someone who viewed me as a line item. And the only real question remaining was what I was going to do about it. Because here's the thing that Emily and her boyfriend had completely miscalculated about me, and honestly, that most people in my life had miscalculated too. The steady, quiet, low-drama guy who came to work every day and did his job without making a scene. The husband who absorbed excuse after excuse without pushing back. That was not weakness. That was discipline. The same discipline that had kept me breathing through situations that would have finished other people. The same discipline that allows you to function when losing your composure means losing your life. And now I was going to put that discipline to work in a different kind of operation, one where I was going to wait, and watch, and build a case so airtight it couldn't be argued with. And when the moment was right, I was going to take apart everything they'd built with the same methodical precision I'd used to dismantle a hostile network. The weeks that followed were a study in controlled deception on my end, me playing the role of the clueless husband while internally filing away every lie, every slip, every piece of evidence that told the real story underneath. I brought her flowers for our anniversary. Watched her fake a smile and explain that she was too tired to go anywhere. Noted the way she checked her phone about 30 seconds after walking away from me. I told her I understood, that we'd celebrate when things settled down, and I caught a flicker of relief in her expression, confirmation that she'd long since stopped considering me someone she needed to worry about. There was one dinner during those weeks that I still remember with painful clarity. Emily had come home late again, citing a marathon session with the European team, and I'd made pasta from scratch because that's always been one of the ways I show up for people I love, and those instincts don't just switch off. She barely looked at the plate when she sat down. More interested in her phone than in the hours I'd put in. "This is nice," she said, completely without feeling, pushing the linguine around like she was looking for somewhere to hide it. "You really didn't have to do all this. It's not an effort when it's for someone you care about," I said back, watching her face for any sign of guilt or even just basic recognition. I found nothing except poorly masked impatience. She left most of her food and excused herself to take a conference call that ran for 2 hours and, based on the sounds coming through the closed office door, involved a lot of laughter that had nothing to do with conference calls. I cleaned the kitchen alone, boxed up leftovers she would never touch, and sat at the counter thinking about when exactly my marriage had become a performance I was required to attend but never actually part of. The next morning I found a receipt in her coat pocket, one she'd meant to throw away. Dinner for two at a restaurant I'd never heard of. The bill showed champagne, oysters, dessert. The kind of spending that says celebration, not client meeting. The date on the receipt was our anniversary. The same night she'd told me she was too exhausted to do anything but fall into bed. She hadn't just forgotten the date. She'd actively made other plans for it, while I sat home watching the hours go by and telling myself that sometimes work really is that demanding. Meanwhile, I kept digging into the financial records, following the thread of money that Emily and Nate had been so careless about concealing. They'd set up a shell company, a marketing consultancy that existed only on paper, and had been routing inflated invoices through North Peak's advertising budget for the past 18 months. The numbers weren't staggering by corporate standards, but they added up. $2.5 million funneled through fake campaigns, ghost vendors, and creative bookkeeping that would make a forensic accountant weep. And the detail that nearly made me laugh out loud, alone in my server room in the dark, they'd done all of it using company systems, leaving digital fingerprints absolutely everywhere, like two amateurs who'd convinced themselves they were criminal masterminds. But it got worse, and of course it got worse. As I kept pulling threads, I found that Emily hadn't only been stealing money and sleeping with her boss. She'd been actively dismantling other people's careers to clear her own path. Internal emails showed her feeding confidential information about competing VP candidates to Nate, giving him material to tank their projects and make them look incompetent in front of Harold Moore, the company's founder and CEO. People who had worked hard and operated with integrity had their careers derailed because my wife wanted a corner office badly enough to burn anyone standing between her and it. Harold Moore was old money and old values. A self-made billionaire who'd built North Peak from a single Montana gas station into a regional energy empire on the strength of stubbornness and an almost religious commitment to doing things right. The kind of man who still sometimes answered his own phone and could recall by name employees he'd crossed paths with once at a company picnic 3 years back. He was also the kind of man who took betrayal personally, the kind of personally that has consequences. When I finished compiling everything, I knew exactly whose desk it needed to land on. The meeting with Harold happened on a Thursday afternoon in his corner office on the 40th floor, where you could see all of Seattle laid out below like a blueprint of everything he'd built. I walked in carrying a black folder packed with printouts, every email, every transaction, every piece of documentation I'd collected, and set it on his desk without any preamble, because Harold was a man who appreciated getting straight to it. "What's this, Coldwell?" he said, not looking up from his screen. "You putting in for time off or something?" "No sir," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "This is an internal security audit documenting potential financial irregularities. Approximately $2.5 million in fraudulent transactions over the past 18 months. That got his full attention. He slowly closed the laptop and looked at me with those gray eyes that had made plenty of opponents sweat across negotiating tables. Harold Moore at 63 still looked like he could handle himself in most situations. There was a reason nobody in the company pushed him twice. "Go on," he said. I laid it out the way I would have briefed a commanding officer, clean, factual, every claim backed by something in the folder. The shell company. The inflated invoices. The paper trail running directly to Nathaniel Blake's personal accounts and from there to a joint fund Emily had access to. The emails where they casually discussed the scheme like they were talking about weekend plans. The communications proving they deliberately undermined other executives to boost Emily's career. And yes, the hotel footage, not because I wanted his sympathy, but because it established the nature of their relationship in a way that gave context to everything else. I'd accessed it through legitimate security channels, the kind of access that technically fell within my role even if I wouldn't normally have had occasion to use it that way. Harold went through the folder page by page, his expression getting harder with each turn. When he finally looked back up at me, I recognized the look on his face from my time in uniform, a man who'd been personally insulted and was already calculating the appropriate response. "Your wife," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. Still is, legally. I expect that'll be changing soon." He looked at me for a long moment. I knew what he was checking for, some signal that this was a bitter husband's personal vendetta rather than a legitimate security matter. Whatever he saw in my face must have cleared that concern, because he gave one sharp nod, the kind that means something has been decided. "They picked the wrong man to underestimate, son. They went after someone who knows how to fight without causing a spectacle." He set his hand flat on top of the folder like he was sealing a promise. "The charity gala is Friday. We're going to make an example that this industry won't forget anytime soon." The next 24 hours were a strange suspended state, going through the motions of my life while knowing everything was about to crack open. I went home. Had dinner with Emily. Listened to her narrate her day while knowing that virtually nothing she said was real. She mentioned the gala, said Nate had hinted at a major announcement, and she was practically glowing with anticipation, already picturing the version of Friday night that existed inside her head. "You'll make sure you look presentable, right?" she said, straightening my collar with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone I'd never actually met. "This matters for my career." "Wouldn't dream of embarrassing you," I said. And I meant it in ways she had no way of understanding. Friday arrived with that rare kind of autumn weather Seattle occasionally produces as an apology for all the rain, crisp, clear, almost theatrical. Emily spent the entire day preparing like she was getting ready for her own wedding. Hair salon, nails, makeup artist, the full production. And when she finally emerged in a $3,000 dress purchased with money she'd stolen from the company she pretended to serve, she looked like a magazine cover and felt about as warm as one. I watched her study herself in the mirror for 20 solid minutes, rotating angles, examining details, like she was memorizing the precise coordinates of her own perfection. The vanity had always been in her, I suppose, but it used to come wrapped in self-awareness, moments where she'd catch me watching and laugh at herself. There was no laughter now. Just cold evaluation, like a product being checked before launch. "The emerald earrings or the diamonds?" she asked, holding one against each ear without actually directing the question at me. "The emeralds pick up your eyes," I said automatically, the kind of reflexive answer I'd given hundreds of times. She ignored it entirely and chose the diamonds. "The diamonds are worth more," she explained to her own reflection. As if that were the only relevant metric, which, I suppose, for her, it had become. We drove to the gala separately because Emily said she might need to stay late for networking and I shouldn't feel like I had to wait around. The real reason was she wanted the freedom to leave with Nate without having to construct an explanation. I accepted the excuse the same way I'd accepted all the others. Let her keep believing I was the harmless nobody she'd written off. Let her walk into that ballroom thinking she was the smartest person in the building. The limo ride to the Grand Aurora was an exercise in studied distance, Emily texting the entire way, me watching the city lights slide past the window and keeping my mind deliberately quiet. She didn't notice my silence. Or she noticed and didn't care. Either way, it suited me fine. The man sitting next to her wasn't the husband she'd decided she could manage without. He was something else now, something she'd helped build with every lie and every scheme, and every morning she looked at me and decided I wasn't worth worrying about. I caught our reflection in the tinted glass, two people informal were close enough to touch, separated by a distance that had nothing to do with inches. I thought about all the times I'd ridden toward situations where the outcome was uncertain and potentially final. This felt different, but also strangely familiar, that particular stillness that comes before a storm you've spent serious time preparing for. The ballroom at the Grand Aurora was everything you'd expect from a high-end corporate charity event. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, servers threading through the crowd with champagne that probably cost more per bottle than a week's groceries for most people. The room was full of investors and board members and executives who all seemed to speak the same private language, the dialect of people who've never had to stress about making rent. Emily transformed the moment we walked through those doors. She became the ideal corporate spouse, poised, magnetic, entirely in her element among people who played exactly the kind of games she'd been playing. I spotted Nate immediately across the room, stationed near the stage with that predatory grin he wore like a badge, looking every inch the polished CFO in his custom suit and his obscenely expensive watch. He caught Emily's eye and gave her a small nod that probably read as innocent to anyone who wasn't actively watching for it. She responded with a slight adjustment of her hair that might as well have been a signal. These two had convinced themselves they were being clever and subtle, when anyone with a functioning brain and a reason to look could read them like a billboard. I spent the cocktail hour making polite conversation with mid-level managers who seemed mildly surprised to discover the cybersecurity director could discuss things unrelated to network architecture. One of them, a woman from accounting named Linda, sharper than her title suggested, asked about Emily with the kind of studied neutrality that told me she probably already had her own suspicions. "Your wife seems to be doing really well," Linda said, watching Emily work the room. "She's certainly made an impression on the executive team." "She has a talent for making impressions," I agreed, keeping my voice perfectly even. And Linda gave me a look that said she understood exactly what I wasn't spelling out. Dinner was an elaborate multi-course affair with the kind of wine pairings that only exist for people on expense accounts. I was seated at a table with board members who spent most of the meal comparing golf scores and discussing vacation homes in Maui. Emily was positioned closer to the stage, flanked by Nate and a couple of other executives who absorbed her every word like she was dispensing rare wisdom rather than running a charm offensive. She glanced at me exactly once during the entire meal, a quick sweep of the eyes to confirm I was still in my designated spot, then returned to her actual audience. The evening moved through its standard paces, speeches about community investment and charitable giving, The usual declarations of commitment to excellence. Emily circulated like someone running for something, introducing herself to board members, laughing at jokes that didn't warrant it, keeping herself in orbit around the stage. She barely registered my presence all night, except to occasionally steer me away from conversations she considered above my station. Around 9 o'clock, Harold Moore stepped up to the stage and the room went quiet in the particular way it does when someone powerful commands attention without trying. He looked distinguished in his tux, the picture of a man who'd earned everything he had, and when he smiled at the crowd there was nothing in his expression to telegraph what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room without any amplification needed. "Tonight we're here to talk about transparency and the direction of this company. But I've always believed you can't build a real future without first being honest about the present." Emily elbowed me in the ribs, her face lit up with anticipation. "This is it," she whispered. "He's announcing the restructuring." I didn't respond. I just watched as Harold nodded to the technician at the AV panel, and the enormous screen behind him blinked to life. Emily went pale so quickly I genuinely thought she might pass out. And from across the room I could see Nate Blake go completely still mid-smile as his own words appeared on a screen the size of a small building, displayed in front of 400 of the most influential people in Seattle's business community. "That old fool Moore won't notice a thing. We can push through another 50 grand before the quarter closes. What about the soldier boy at home? Ryan? He's harmless. A nobody who will be out of my life as soon as the bonuses hit." The silence in that ballroom was total. The kind where you can actually hear the ice shifting in the champagne buckets. And then Harold's voice cut through it like a blade. "These messages," he said, in a tone that was almost conversational, "were exchanged between my chief financial officer and my director of marketing over the past several months, as part of a scheme that defrauded this company of over $2 million and deliberately destroyed the careers of several hard-working executives whose only mistake was standing in someone else's way." The screen shifted to financial documents, transaction records, the full paper trail laid out in undeniable detail. A murmur rolled through the crowd like the first tremor before an earthquake, and someone's champagne glass hit the marble floor and shattered with a sound like a starting gun. Then the video appeared. Surveillance footage from the Silver Bay Hotel. Emily and Nate walking through the lobby together, his hand resting low on her back, both of them laughing like people without a care in the world, stepping into an elevator that clearly wasn't taking them to separate floors. The footage was composed enough that it wouldn't air on the evening news, but clear enough in what it showed that nobody in that room could maintain any polite pretense about what they were watching. Nate moved toward the exit, but 2 security guards stepped into his path like they'd been placed there specifically for that moment, because they had been, since I'd personally briefed them before the event. His expression went from confident predator to pale wreck in approximately 3 seconds, and watching him understand in real time that his entire constructed world was coming apart almost, made up for 4 months of lying awake alone in the dark. Emily grabbed my arm, fingers pressing in hard enough to leave marks, her voice a desperate hiss that she probably intended to be quiet but that carried clearly in the silence around us. "Ryan, do something. This is wrong. These are fabricated. Someone set this up." I looked at her, really looked at her, past the flawless makeup and the expensive dress, all the way to the person she'd actually become. The person who'd called me harmless and a nobody in writing, who'd lied to my face every single day for months without flinching, who'd stolen and manipulated and left a trail of damaged people behind her without a moment of visible remorse. And what I felt wasn't anger. It was something quieter than that. A cold, settled clarity that was almost like peace. "I'm the head of cybersecurity, Emily," I said, making sure my voice carried to the people standing close enough to catch every word. "I personally authenticated every single one of those files. Every one of them is real." I reached down and lifted her hand off my sleeve, slowly and deliberately, the way you'd remove a piece of thread from an otherwise fine jacket. The expression on her face as it finally registered, as she grasped my role in all of this, was something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Not with pride exactly, but with the somber recognition that some things, once done, cannot be walked back. Harold's voice came through the speakers again, formal and final now. "Emily Coldwell and Nathaniel Blake are hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately. Their participation in corporate fraud and ethics violations has been reported to the relevant authorities, who are currently waiting in the lobby to continue this conversation." Camera flashes erupted everywhere, a storm of light as every journalist in the room understood they were holding the kind of story that makes careers. Emily stood at the center of it all, the image she'd spent years constructing dissolving in real time around her. Across the room, Nate was being guided toward the exit by security with the kind of firm, practiced grip that made it clear resistance wasn't an option. She turned to me one final time, and I watched the emotions move across her face in sequence. Shock collapsing into rage, rage dissolving into something that looked a lot like fear, as she finally understood the full scope of what she'd underestimated. "You did this," she said. Flat. "Certain." "You did this," I said back. "I just wrote it all down." The crowd parted as I walked toward the exit, and I didn't look back. Behind me I could hear Emily's voice climbing in pitch as the officers approached, a string of excuses and accusations that nobody around her was paying attention to anymore. But all of it faded to background noise the moment I stepped out into the cool Seattle night and took the first deep breath I'd managed in what felt like a very long time. The next 48 hours were a hurricane of consequences that I watched from a careful remove, like observing a controlled demolition from behind a barrier. Nate's attorney got him out on bail, but his first move was to throw Emily under the bus so thoroughly that their old alliance became a running joke in corporate circles for months. According to his statement, he'd been seduced and manipulated into a scheme he hadn't truly understood, coerced by a woman who'd used her personal appeal to override his better judgment. Which was exactly the brand of spineless deflection I'd expected from a man who'd never voluntarily accepted responsibility for anything. The media coverage was relentless in the way everything is relentless now, every detail picked apart and reassembled and picked apart again until only the outrage and the commentary remain. Someone leaked Emily's corporate headshot, and overnight her face was everywhere, the high-flying executive who had betrayed her company, her husband, and essentially everyone who'd ever done her a favor. The comment sections were predictably brutal, equal parts moral fury and barely concealed satisfaction at watching someone fall from a height they'd worked hard to reach. The colleagues who'd smiled at her in conference rooms and accepted her help with their projects turned on her with a particular ferocity reserved for people who get caught doing what everyone suspected but couldn't prove. The same executives who'd praised her drive and her ambition were suddenly claiming they'd always sensed something was off about her, always knew she was too hungry, too strategic, too willing to step on whatever needed stepping on. The kind of revisionist history that organizations are very good at, everyone rushing to distance themselves from failure while quietly pocketing whatever credit they'd earned from her success. Emily's corporate cards were cut off before she even left the gala. Her accounts frozen as part of the fraud investigation. Her company car flagged for immediate return. By morning, her face was on the front page of every local outlet, and not in the way she'd spent years working toward. The ambitious executive who'd gambled everything on a corner office was now the cautionary tale that HR departments would reference in ethics training for years to come. I got calls from reporters wanting quotes, attorneys wanting depositions, former colleagues wanting gossip dressed up as genuine concern. I didn't engage with most of them. This wasn't a narrative I needed to shape or a story I wanted to own. The documented evidence existed in court filings and financial records and corporate communications that would probably be studied in business ethics programs for a while. She tried to come home that night. Stood out in the rain by the front gate like something out of a movie, except this wasn't a romantic comedy, and there was no heartwarming moment of forgiveness coming. The gate code had already been changed, something I'd taken care of earlier in the day alongside a consultation with a divorce attorney who specialized in asset protection in cases involving spousal fraud. Her belongings were packed in boxes already softening in the Seattle drizzle, designer clothes and expensive shoes and all the physical evidence of a life she'd built on stolen resources and broken trust. I watched her on the security camera for a while. Watched her pound on the gate and then the door. Watched the mascara track down her cheeks in long black lines as the rain turned her from corporate predator into something smaller and harder to look at. There was a time when seeing her in distress would have brought me running, whatever she'd done. That time had passed somewhere between reading those messages and watching her lie to my face with no visible conflict whatsoever. She stood out there for nearly an hour, cycling between pounding on things and slumping against them. I found myself wondering what was actually going through her mind. Whether she was genuinely sorry or just sorry about the outcome. Whether somewhere behind all the calculation there was even a basic understanding of the difference. The rain kept falling, indifferent the way weather always is to human problems, the way life tends to be indifferent to people who've run out of chances they were never paying much attention to. Eventually she pulled out her phone, probably calling one of the friends who would soon discover that association with her had become professionally inconvenient. When I finally opened the door, I stayed on the threshold. The rain was coming down hard now, and Emily looked like a completely different person from the woman who'd spent the entire morning preparing for her own coronation. She reached for me the moment she saw the door open, her voice cracking with an urgency that might have been persuasive if I hadn't spent months cataloging every layer of her deception. "Ryan, please, you have to listen to me," she said, hands shaking, from cold, or fear, or both. "This is all being misread. If you just give me the chance to explain." "There's no we here anymore, Emily," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me. Steady. Far away. Like I was reporting a weather condition to someone down the street. There hasn't been one for a long time. You made that very plain in your own words. Those messages were venting. I was stressed. I didn't mean any of it. You know how much pressure I've been under. What struck me most in that moment wasn't her fear or her desperation. It was the fact that she was still doing it. Still lying, still pivoting, still treating me like the harmless nobody from her text messages. Even now, with everything around her in ruins, she couldn't find her way to the truth. Couldn't acknowledge what she'd done without immediately repackaging it as something someone else's fault. Some people never get there, never figure out that the tactics that got them into trouble are not going to be the tactics that pull them back out. I reached behind the door and produced a manila envelope, the kind that feels heavier than it should based purely on what it represents. Divorce papers, I said, setting them in her hands. And a restraining order. You're required to stay at least 500 feet from me, from this house, and from my workplace. The house was purchased entirely with my income and my inheritance, so you'll be taking your personal belongings and nothing beyond that. Her face shifted into something harder, the last traces of the charming public persona finally falling away. You think you can just discard me after everything I put into this marriage? I almost let that land as funny. Almost let the sheer audacity of it crack my composure. But I held on. What exactly did you put into this marriage, Emily? An affair with your boss? $2.5 million in company theft? Calling me harmless and writing while you planned your exit? Spending our anniversary with someone else while I sat at home? I shook my head slowly. You didn't treat this marriage like something worth protecting. You treated it like overhead. And now you're learning that some losses can't be recovered. You're making a massive mistake, she said, and the warmth was completely gone now, nothing left but cold venom. I will take you apart in court. I'll walk away with everything. You're welcome to try, I said, and I genuinely meant it. But I'd read those papers carefully before you map out your strategy. My attorney has a very thorough picture of your financial situation, including a few specific transactions that the federal investigators might find worth their time, if they haven't already. The fight left her then, fast, like watching the pressure drop out of a room. She leaned against the doorframe with the envelope held against her chest, and the woman in front of me looked nothing like the executive she'd sacrificed everything to become. I realized, somewhat to my own surprise, that I felt something close to pity. Not because she didn't deserve what was happening, but because I was watching someone arrive at the full weight of their own choices and finally, too late, understand what they'd actually cost. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, and her voice had gone small. That's not something I can answer for you anymore, I said. And I closed the door. The click of the lock sounded like the closing of a chapter. Which is exactly what it was. I stood in the foyer of my empty house and listened to the rain and the muffled sounds of Emily retreating, and I waited for the wave of triumph or vindication, or at the very minimum, satisfaction, to wash over me. What I felt instead was a particular kind of emptiness. The kind you feel when you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and finally putting it down leaves you feeling lighter but also strangely unmoored. I went to the living room and poured myself a glass of whiskey from the bottle I'd been saving for a significant occasion without ever quite settling on what that meant. The first sip burned the right way, and I settled into my chair and watched the rain through the glass and let my mind go quiet for the first time in months. There was still plenty ahead, lawyers, paperwork, probably months of legal proceedings before anything was fully resolved, but that was a problem for a future version of me. The present version had done what needed doing, and was now going to sit in the silence and appreciate that it no longer felt like something pressing down on him. The house felt different. Or maybe I was different. Probably both. The traces of Emily's presence were still everywhere, her design choices, the furniture arranged the way she'd arranged it, but they felt like artifacts from a dig site now, evidence of a previous era rather than part of anything living. I'd change things eventually. Make the space mine in the ways I'd never bothered to push for when I was busy accommodating someone who'd already decided she wasn't staying. The weeks that followed came with their full parade of legal proceedings, depositions, and the kind of paperwork that makes you briefly appreciate the efficiency of more direct solutions. Emily's attorney tried every available angle: workplace pressure, controlling husband, a rotating cast of alternative explanations that might have landed if there hadn't been a documented mountain of evidence suggesting otherwise. The fraud investigation grew to include federal charges once the offshore account surfaced, and suddenly Emily's legal situation was significantly larger than a contested divorce. I testified twice, once for the divorce, once for the federal case, and both times I kept my answers short, factual, and completely resistant to any bait designed to get me emotional or speculative. Her legal team tried to frame me as a vengeful husband who'd manufactured a case out of personal spite. But the forensic accountants had validated everything I'd found, and then identified additional items. By the end of the first week of testimony, Even her own lawyers appeared to be going through the motions. The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings, or the media attention, or the occasional hostile run-in with someone who'd bought Emily's version of events. The hardest part was the quiet. Coming home to an empty house and instinctively reaching for my phone to share something about my day, before remembering that the person I'd shared that ritual with for nearly a decade was simply gone. Not dead, just transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone I wouldn't choose to know even if recognition were possible. Nate took a plea deal that came with significant prison time and financial penalties large enough to erase most of what he'd stolen. His cooperation agreement made it impossible for Emily to claim she hadn't understood the full scope of what they'd been doing. His wife filed for divorce within the week, and word through the corporate network was that she'd sold the house in Medina and moved back to her family in Connecticut with the kids. Another set of people whose lives had been upended by two individuals who'd decided the rules were for other people. I crossed paths with Nate's ex-wife once, about 6 months after everything, in a coffee shop near my office. She recognized me before I recognized her, which made sense, since my face had been in the news almost as often as her husband's, and she stopped at my table with an expression I couldn't immediately read. "Ryan Coldwell," she said. "Not a question." "Mrs. Blake," I said, not sure what else to offer. "Catherine, please." I think formality is a bit beside the point at this stage. She asked if she could sit for a minute, and we talked for about 22 people whose lives had been taken apart by the same source, comparing notes on what rebuilding looks like. She was doing better than I'd expected. Had reconnected with people who mattered. Was putting together a version of herself that didn't depend on her husband's career or his web of lies. She thanked me, which I hadn't anticipated, for bringing everything into the light. "The not knowing was the worst part," she said, stirring coffee she barely touched. "Suspecting, but never being certain. At least now I know exactly what I was dealing with." I told her I was glad she was moving forward, and I meant it. After she left, I sat there for a while thinking about everyone whose path had crossed with Emily and Nate's operation, all the people caught in the wreckage of two individuals who'd been so certain of their own cleverness. Harold Moore called me into his office a month after the gala, and I arrived expecting either a promotion or a careful conversation about the boundaries of my information gathering. What I got instead was something I hadn't anticipated, a handshake and an offer of partnership in a new security consulting firm he was launching as a North Peak subsidiary. "You manage this like a professional," he said, those gray eyes doing their usual assessment. "No unnecessary drama, no spectacle beyond what the situation required, just clean execution. That's a specific kind of skill. And I could use it." I told him I'd think it over, because I needed time to understand what kind of life I actually wanted to build now that the old one had been cleared away. The money was real and the opportunity was legitimate, but I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the rest of my working life excavating other people's deceptions. There's a tax on that kind of work, a slow erosion of your ability to take anything at face value. And I'd already paid more than enough of that tax. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday in April, 6 months after the night I first noticed Emily texting in the dark. The judge had moved efficiently once the financial crimes were factored into the asset picture, and Emily's efforts to claim half of everything had collapsed under the documented weight of her own stated intentions to leave once the money cleared. She walked away with her personal belongings and her legal bills. And I walked out of that courthouse feeling something I hadn't felt in longer than I could accurately remember, the very specific freedom of having something heavy lifted off you that you'd stopped noticing was there. I did take Harold's offer, eventually, after a few months of therapy and genuine reflection and the slow process of figuring out who Ryan Coldwell was supposed to be when he wasn't performing the role of loyal husband to someone who'd never intended to reciprocate the loyalty. The work is challenging and sometimes dark. But it also means other companies don't get blindsided the way North Peak nearly was, that other employees don't lose their careers to people willing to destroy them for a title, that other families don't get dismantled by people who decided the rules were optional. Emily reached out once, about a year after everything concluded, through an intermediary, because the restraining order was still active. She wanted to apologize, apparently. Wanted closure or forgiveness or whatever it is that makes the weight of bad choices feel lighter. I never responded. Not because I was still carrying the anger that had burned out long ago, leaving something quieter and more complicated in its place. But because there was genuinely nothing left to say. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. The consequences had landed where they should. Going back over any of it would have been like pressing on a wound that had finally started to close. Last I heard, she was working at a small marketing firm somewhere in Arizona, starting from nothing and rebuilding whatever she could from what remained of her reputation. Some part of me hopes she finds her way, not for her sake particularly, but because the possibility of people actually changing is something worth believing in, even for people who spectacularly wasted their first opportunity. But that part of me is small and quiet, and it doesn't keep me awake the way her betrayal used to. These days, I sleep well. The bed doesn't feel like a contested territory anymore, it's just a place to rest. I've started seeing someone, a veterinarian with laugh lines around her eyes and a total inability to tell a convincing lie about anything. And sometimes I notice myself being surprised by how uncomplicated things can be when both people are genuinely invested. The house has changed too, new paint, new furniture, enough differences that it no longer functions as a monument to a marriage that failed. I kept a few things, practical items that were mine before Emily and remained mine after her. Almost everything we accumulated together is gone, donated, sold, or simply let go. Starting over at 41 wasn't the plan. But then again, almost nothing about the past year went according to any plan I'd made. And I've learned to be okay with that. Sometimes I think back to that night in the ballroom, the exact moment the floor dropped out from under everything, and I try to identify what I was actually feeling as I watched Emily's carefully built world come apart in real time. What I remember isn't triumph. It isn't revenge. It isn't even particular satisfaction. What I remember is exhaustion. The deep, bone-level tiredness of being finally, completely finished with a fight I'd never asked to have. She'd turned our marriage into a war. I'd won. But winning didn't feel like victory. It felt like walking away from a wreck you hadn't been driving. I'm not telling this story to cast myself as the hero or to reduce Emily to a villain, though she was certainly not the protagonist of our particular chapter. I'm telling it because people reveal who they are in the small moments long before they reveal it in the large ones. And the actual failure of my marriage wasn't the affair, or the fraud, or the very public unraveling at the gala. The real failure was all those smaller moments, the quiet dismissals, the accumulated disrespects, that I chose to let go because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging that something was fundamentally broken. By the time she was writing me off as harmless in messages to her lover, she'd been treating me as harmless for years. And I'd allowed it, because the alternative required a kind of honesty I wasn't ready for. That's the thing I carry forward with me now, into this new chapter with its hard-earned clarity and its actual possibilities. Pay attention to the small things. Trust the part of you that says something is wrong. And never let anyone talk you into believing your own peace of mind matters less than their convenience. The rain is coming down again tonight, same Seattle rain that's been falling longer than anyone around here can remember. And I'm in my living room with a glass of whiskey and absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. The silence in this house isn't heavy anymore. It's just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in after a storm has moved through and taken everything it came for. Tomorrow there will be work and complications and all the ordinary difficulty of living a real life in a world that doesn't factor in your feelings. But tonight, right now, there's just this, a man in his own space, at peace with his decisions, looking ahead at whatever's coming without fear or obligation or the slow accumulated weight of someone else's lies. And after everything that happened, honestly, that's more than enough.